have given that money. And related to that, there's a note in the report that says that there is no restriction on the money that comes back to us. In the spirit of the grant, ought we to be reinvesting that in further decarbonisation projects as profit yielded from this source? Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. The first thing to say is that we as a City Council are one of several funders of this particular project, and the list of the funders is in the report, and they're all conforming to the highest ethical standards. We've got Tridus Bank, for instance, which is one of the most ethically reputable banks. It's a B Corp. So I'm very comfortable that the other investors very much match up with our ethical framework. The second thing to say is that the amount of interest that we charge is based on the Public Loans Works Board benchmark. And if there is a windfall, the report also makes clear that the City Council has a significant voice in determining how that windfall would be spent. And you're right, decarbonisation on a greater scale is one of those things that we could seek to spend that money on. But certainly it's for the intended purpose of wider community benefit if we do get that windfall.
Thank you. I just must reiterate, those anybody who feels uncomfortable taking a mask off while talking, you can keep it on, just for clarity.
Lord Mayor, I should say I've been texted to say that the live stream on YouTube isn't working.
Thank you. Okay, we need to take the vote now, so those for, stand please.
Lord Mayor, apart from yourself, I don't see anyone still sitting down. And Marie's got her hand up. Can we just check? So, can those who are standing sit down, please? And can I just check? Can I just check that there are no votes against? And Lord Mayor abstaining. Lord Mayor in favour. That's everyone in favour.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 8, Financial Outturn Report 2020-2021. So it's the Integrated Performance Report for quarterly 4. Councillor Ed Turner to present.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Just on a technical note, the reason this Cabinet report comes to Council is exclusively because of the recommendations which are down here. So ordinarily such report would just go to Cabinet. That being said, I'm glad it's here because it does provide us an opportunity to understand the outturn. In a normal year we would also review our performance, but we decided in the course of the pandemic that the normal performance measures weren't appropriate. So that's why this is financially focused. And maybe starting off with the less good news around it. I mean, we knew that the pandemic would have a tremendous impact, an adverse impact on our finances. Clearly, last year we received significant, if inadequate, compensation from the government for a number of some of our extra expenditure. And also our losses of income. But there were still some areas which the government arbitrarily excluded from compensation for loss of income. That was disappointing. And also the government was clear it would not be compensating us for all loss of income, which I think is a shame. There are dribs and drabs of that coming through, but it does mean, although we have what is essentially set out here, a £2 million net hit after government compensation on our general fund, in terms of the future, the worst is yet to come on the impacts on our general fund. So the situation remains extremely difficult, but what comes out in the outturn is in line with our projections in terms of those sort of shortfalls. Obviously, we deliberately slowed our capital programme to give ourselves financial options as needed, and there were some operational hits as well. Those are detailed in the report. And that work has now resumed and can continue. and the impacts on the housing revenue account are also set out. Now, although those issues aren't for decision, and frankly they weren't for decision by Cabinet because it's an informational report, I'll certainly be happy to take any questions on it. The other thing, which is the subject, the reason this is here at Cabinet actually, at Council today, is that we need to make an allocation for grant payments totalling nearly £5 million in relation to housing and growth deal schemes, and there's a further £30,000 set out in paragraph 26 as well. So these are monies which we receive from the growth deal, so from government. We will receive them, but we need to include them in our budget if we're to spend them. It's welcome that we're getting this money in. The expenditure on the new affordable housing is really, really important in Oxford, and certainly those of us on this side of the council chamber will leave no stone unturned in our attempts to get new build affordable housing built. And therefore, Lord Mayor, I would like us to pass these recommendations as well.
Thank you very much. Do we have a seconder, please?
Formally second, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. And again, Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's a very impressive report, and our council has clearly done very well in an almost impossible year. But there is no benchmarking against other authorities. That would have been particularly difficult, I know, in the last financial year, but it would be extremely helpful, I think, for council if that could be included in our future reports on the outcomes. It would be useful to have Councillor Turner's view on whether this can be set up for the future. Thank you.
Lord Mayor, I assumed you'd want to take a few, but I'm happy to do them one by one if people are enjoying my pearls of wisdom. Up to you.
That's it, one by one. Replied.
Yeah, fine, good. Thanks to the councillor for the suggestion. I mean, with the outturn report, I think there's some information which we're required to provide, and its main purpose is about what happens in Oxford. I think it's an interesting challenge, though, about benchmarking information. We can look at it. Some third parties do actually produce comparators around different local authorities, and there were some returns which had to be submitted to government, for example, on loss of income and levels of compensation. So some of that information is already available. I think, my suggestion, given the significant pressures on the finance team, would be rather than us commissioning new work from scratch, we can look at what's available, and if there is something which would aid people's understanding of the comparative context of our finances, I'm happy to do it. I mean, if I may, the question is interesting. Oxford is particularly exposed to COVID losses for this reason, that we have our Oxford model that relies on trading, income. It also relies on commercial property income. If those things don't happen, and the pandemic affected them severely, then we are more exposed than a local authority which has simply run around cutting its services, because they're then not affected by the hits on income. So unfortunately, because we are ambitious as a council, because we don't like cutting frontline services, we have suffered greater losses, and we've been less fairly treated by government, if you like, than local authorities that have simply run around cutting things.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you for the report, and thank you for answering that question so well. I just wondered, given your comments earlier on, will we be looking at another mini revised budget this autumn again, as we did last year?
Lord Mayor, I don't think we will. I think we have to be fleet of foot in terms of government grants, and there are some schemes which may yet require variations to the budget. So if that's a mini budget, so let's say, for example, there is a government scheme around housing where we can access extra money, but we have to do that in year, then we would bring forward changes. But I don't think we're going to be making systematic wholesale overhauls to our budget. I think that will wait for the regular budget period.
Thank you. Councillor Landell-Mills, please.
Thank you. Councillor Turner, thank you for the report you're providing. You intimate, I mean, some of the challenges faced, and I was interested to hear how you think that these problems will be dealt with. The first one is the delayed capital projects, which there's quite a considerable amount of work's been delayed, and expenditure which helped balance the books. But how's that money going to be spent?
So what happened is some capital schemes were delayed, and they will then, as far as possible, be carried out this year. I mean, Alex Hollingsworth may wish to add a bit more on this, but we've invested a lot in trying to make sure our project management capacity around a capital programme improves. To be completely candid with the councillor, at the risk of not putting our best foot forward, even prior to COVID, this was an area where we probably where we should have done better. We didn't always spend capital, and sometimes there was a bit of optimism bias in our projections as well about spend. So what we've tried to do is get the process right. We tried to make sure the capital schemes are resourced. That being said, I have to say there will still be challenges. One of the things I'm hearing, for example, is that the building materials market is not looking at all clever at the moment, so that might have an impact. And also the government's decisions around Brexit are very bad in terms of labour supply in some of these areas as well. So it is going to be an area where we have a watching brief. We may not deliver all of it, but we're going to give ourselves a fighting chance.
To follow on from that, when does...
No, please. Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth, please.
Well, if it's a follow-on question on project management, I might be better listening to it first.
With regard to the city companies, the deficit carries on into 2025. When do you think we're going to start getting a return from the city companies? And these logistical problems, how long do you think they're going to impact on the city companies?
I fear, Lord Mayor, the councillor is not quite right in what he's saying, because we're expecting very significant income over the MTFS from our city companies over a mixture of interest repayments on loans, interest-bearing repayments on loans, and also a dividend. So we are expecting to receive income from the companies. It's correct that the level of income in the case of OCHL will be reprofiled, and we'll talk more about that, I think, in due course at the shareholder meetings. And also it's the case that ODS has been affected by the pandemic, and it will take some years to get back to normal. But the Oxford model remains our ambition, and we need that. In terms of when building supplies may return to normal and labour impacts of Brexit will be cleared up, the answers respectively are I don't know and probably never.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Just on the project management aspect, as Councillor Turner suggested, I could add a bit on that. The project management team led by Carolyn Plozinski is working hard to bring back onto schedule all the projects that were paused, and most of them are now back on revised schedules. The challenges that Councillor Turner outlined about the cost of building materials, and even where it's not cost, the ability to supply them are very, very real. And the combination of Brexit impact, COVID impact, and indeed the restart after the disruption of last year has made availability difficult pretty much across the piece. And that will continue to be a challenge. But on the broader projects front, things are beginning to get back into gear. But individual projects will remain challenging for all the reasons that have been outlined.
Thank you. Any more questions from the floor? I don't see any. Okay, we're going to move to the vote. Oh, sorry, Ed. Anything else to say?
I mean, let's not lose the fact that the reason we're voting is on recommendations that will enable us to get dozens of new social housing units. And let's, for a moment, remember, Lord Mayor, those are going to be dozens of lives in Oxford transformed by having somewhere secure and affordable to live. So in all of the doom and gloom that I've been putting about for the last 10 minutes, let's not lose sight of the positive.
Thank you very much. No more questions. Okay, I want to move to the vote. Okay, those in favour, please stand up. I shall lead by example.
Lord Mayor, I think that is everybody stood up, and Councillor Tidball has got her hand up. So can I just check if those in favour sit down, and those against, anyone against, stand up or wave at me, and anyone abstaining? Any abstentions? Nope, that's everyone then in favour.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 9, decisions taken under Part 9.3 of the Constitution. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I move the report which refers to enabling works to facilitate the decarbonisation project.
And do we have a seconder? Okay, Ed Turner, thank you. Any questions? Okay, we're going to move to the vote. Comments? No. Okay, let's move to the vote, please. Those in favour, please stand. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, item 10, urgent key decisions taken since March 2020. Again, over to Susan Brown.
So this one is another report for Council to note, and again, this is urgent items that had to be taken as key decisions by the Chief Executive in between meetings about expenditure relating to COVID-19, decarbonisation, homelessness, and I move the report.
Thank you very much. Again, do we have a seconder? Councillor Upton. Okay, any questions? Any comments? Okay, same again, let's move to the vote. Keep moving, stand up please, those in favour.
That's everyone, Lord Mayor. Thank you, it is easier to see.
Item 11, review of allocation of seats to political groups. Again, over to Susan Brown.
Yes, it's really the Monitoring Officer's report, just to reflect the fact that following the formation of the independent group, there was a reallocation of seats to political groups, but that they have chosen not to take them up. I haven't got anything else to add to that.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Upton again. Thank you. Any questions? Any comments? Okay, again, let's move to the vote. Those in favour, please stand up.
That's everyone has stood up. Can I just double check that no one is against? Is anyone voting against? And anyone abstaining? Yep, that's carried.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 12, proposed amendments to the Constitution. Again, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. This is the amendments to the Constitution that contain references to changes in the way that we're doing the shareholder and joint venture groups and like the previous one, we have pointed effectively to this revised set up earlier on this agenda. So I trust that Council will then approve this amendment to the Constitution, which seems pretty non-controversial. So thank you very much.
Any questions? Seconder, sorry. Councillor Hollingsworth to second. Any questions? Any comments? Councillor Landell-Mills. Can you turn your microphone on, please?
With regard to the scrutiny panel's ability to question, how will that be dealt with?
In terms of, I mean, they're going to be able to question at shareholder group.
Yeah. I mean, we're simply there as observers, so there should be some feedback mechanism, I would have thought. Otherwise, it's kind of not that useful, or not as useful as it might be.
Through you, Lord Mayor. I mean, my understanding is that they would be able to question at the shareholder group, but I would ask the monitoring officer if she might have any further comments on that.
Susan?
Through you, Lord Mayor, that's absolutely my understanding too, that scrutiny members will be able to question and discuss and participate in the shareholder and joint venture group. They simply won't be able to formally debate or vote at that meeting.
So I don't know if everyone could hear that, but I think that confirms what I was saying, is that they would be able to participate.
Any further questions? Comments? Move to the vote. Those in favour, stand up again, please.
Lord Mayor, I see everyone standing up and Marie Tidwell has her hand up, and if people sit down, can I just check then? Do we have anyone voting against? I see none, and abstentions? I see none, so that's carried. You know.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 13, we have the Cabinet minutes. We have 3 sets, dated 14th of April, 16th of June, and the 21st of July. Any questions? Councillor Wade?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I've got a question about the second set of minutes. That's the ones of the 16th of June. My question is that Cabinet resolved to approve the procurement of a support service for the Council's Housing First programme on that day, and it went out to tender on the 18th of May, and I was wondering if we could possibly have an update as to whether providers have been found, and if so, who the providers are, because it's an urgent matter that we get the providers in place to help with this programme. Thank you.
Which Cabinet member is going to respond? Councillor Blackins?
Sorry, I was trying to do the combination between getting the mask off and getting up my notes. In terms of thank you for the question, but in terms of the update on Housing First, I'd probably be best prepared to bring a more written report at our next council meeting, or if not circulated prior to, that suits.
Yes, if you could send an email before the next full council. Thank you. Any more questions? Okay. Sorry. So just to clarify, no more questions on any of the 3 Cabinet meetings? No? Okay, right, we'll move on. Item 14, questions on notice from members of council. Sorry about that. Okay. Councillor Jarvis to Councillor Upton.
No supplementary.
Okay. Councillor Jarvis to Councillor Upton, second one.
Yes, I do have a supplementary on this. So the second half of this question is specifically in relation to what's being done to protect people from deportation and detention under the hostile environment policy, and the response that we have in these papers doesn't appear to give any clarification as to what protection is being given for those who are referred to the national referral mechanism. So I wondered if we could get some additional clarity on that, please.
Thanks for the follow-up. I'm not sure what else I can give you about. You said the details of how it works are in the link there at the bottom. Most people who we refer to this will be, as we say, we see them as victims. So this is all about supporting them and helping them out of the predicament that they're in. If somebody felt that they were going to be at risk by being put forward to this, we can do it anonymously. So we do that anonymously if we have to. I'm not sure what else we can do, given that it is a statutory requirement that we have to inform the national, inform the Home Office under this scheme. So we do as I say, we do it with the best of intentions always, as we believe that this is going to be helping them. But if people are concerned, then we can do it anonymously.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis to Councillor Blackens, preventing evictions.
No supplementary.
Councillor Smoken to Councillor Blackens, empty properties.
No supplementary, just thank you for the unexpected good news.
Councillor Wade to Councillor Blackens.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I do have a supplementary because I'm concerned that there hasn't been a response to the question in which I asked if the Cabinet member would write to the Housing Secretary and the Chancellor to support the charities calling for an extension of the 3 regional Housing First pilot schemes. This is very important. This impacts on the country as a whole. And so I would like to know whether she is now prepared to do that. Thank you.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Clarkson. Sorry, yes. You can respond.
Thanks, I couldn't tell where you were looking. We will be writing to the Minister, and I will be able to give a briefing of what that will include once that letter has gone out.
Thank you. Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Clarkson, Waterways Liaison Work.
Lord Mayor, thank you very much for that. It's really good news. Glad to hear it. It would be very useful to have the officer's name. If you're not able to say who that is here in this meeting, perhaps you could let me know the name of the officer so I can get in touch. That would be great.
Thank you, Councillor Wolfe. I think I can say his name is Michael Wood. I've had meetings with him already, and we're working very closely on river water status. Thank you.
Councillor Malik to Councillor Turner, Crescent Road Kickabout area.
Thank you, Councillor Turner, for your response. I think you will agree with me, it's dragging on some years now. And last time it was a very good news when they agreed the price and good money for Section 106, if you remember, which got excited in Temple Kavli, more money coming to invest. But could you please kindly ask them if they're still interested or not? Otherwise, you know, whatever the next step is, either is going to be open bidding or whatever the process, due course, you want to follow.
Thanks. I mean, first of all, yes, indeed. I mean, this has been an absurdly long-running issue. I think I remember attending correspondence about the said kickabout area in the mid-2000s. So it's had a long life as an issue. And I share the councillor's pleasure when the sale was on the cards. It is being chased up by officers. They're trying to get clarity. Obviously, Brookes University has been affected by the pandemic, and there's all sorts of things going on in universities. So we probably have to cut them a bit of slack. But if their position has changed, then we'll have to look at something else. What I will do is ask the officers to keep both councillors for the area looped in.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Turner. Implications of subsidy control bill.
Yeah. Lord Mayor, thank you. Thank you very much, Ed. That's a very full reply and very interesting too. I share your concerns about the dodgy direction of government spending. I'm sure we all do. Will the council be monitoring whether the government is going to give us more flexibility in supporting our companies, especially considering their importance as a source of income?
Lord Mayor, I'm sure we'll keep an eye on it. I mean, the issue, of course, is our companies do need to deliver for us. And so if we were in a position of offering them more subsidy, that might be at odds with the goals of our MTFS, which is to receive money from them rather than the other way around. But there may be, I suppose, some aspects of the legal relationship that might change, where you might be able to put things on a more straightforward footing if the rules were different. So we'll certainly keep it in mind. And thanks to the councillor for flagging the issue.
Thank you for his reply. It's a variant to the concern expressed elsewhere about the fate of the city centre and having, this seems to be business as usual. That's not the impression I get from other sources of information. Is he convinced of that? And is there any chance of a more strategic approach rather than this ad hoc approach?
So a number of things in there, Lord Mayor. I mean, firstly, I'm certainly aware of people campaigning against housing developments who put it about that there's lots of vacant property in the city centre. And so I think it's very important that in this we draw on the facts. And in relation to our own property portfolio, the position is precisely as set out here, 3 vacant units. Secondly, we will, of course, as I said in my answer, keep a watching brief, and clearly we will be strategic. So, for example, if a major site looks like coming back, then we may well do a more comprehensive options appraisal, and we'll, of course, consider retail alongside other potential uses. That may well work in some cases. At the same time, if a business is let out and is trading successfully, then we wouldn't be using public money in a wise way if we started building castles in the air, buildings of fantasy which could not be realised because that property was successfully let for the long term. I do think we do ourselves a service, frankly, if we work on the basis of facts in this sort of area rather than propaganda. And I think there's a real risk in embracing a misplaced narrative in order to further particular campaigning ends that we are talking our city centre and its traders down.
Councillor Miles to Councillor Hayes. Food delivery by bike.
Thank you. I welcome the timely development of the electric vehicle strategy for Oxford. Just building on that, though, does the council commit or at least encourage the tracking of the proportion of food deliveries made by e-bike or conventional bike from these food delivery licence holders? And secondly, are you willing as a council to also encourage some explicit guidance, encouraging the use of e-bike or conventional bikes for food delivery licence holders? Thank you.
Apologies, Lord Mayor, I didn't hear the first question.
Just to repeat, would the council either commit or encourage or explore maybe to track the data on the proportion of food delivery outfits in Oxford that are delivering food by bike or e-bike as opposed to moped?
Thanks, Lord Mayor. We have regular conversations with businesses in the city and the district centres, and I'm fairly sure that we could have a conversation with them around that particular issue that you raise. I think that would take part as in the course of our usual conversations rather than a bespoke consultation on that issue, but very happy to try and find that information out.
Thank you.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Hayes, Mansellway electric taxi charging points.
Thanks for the answer. No supplementary. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Hayes, e-vehicle charging point strategy.
No, I don't have a supplementary on that either. Thank you.
Councillor Miles, Councillor Hayes, ZEZ pilot delays.
No supplementary question.
Councillor Malik to Councillor Hayes, low traffic neighbourhood consultations.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. Thanks for the answer. I think your answers are completely incorrect when you say the views are, businesses are mixed. I'm sure everybody reads the Oxford Mail where it says 80% businesses are against. My question is still the same, rather going on to the answering. I think, how many business you have spoken yourself as a local councillor?
Thanks. Of the figure that you just gave, the 80% figure, that's 80% of 25 respondents that are businesses to the consultation. Now, clearly, every single response is important, but I think you know as well as I do that on Cowley Road and St Clement Street, there are many more businesses than 25. So I think it's really important that we try to make sure that all of those businesses have their views heard, whether they're supportive or against the LTNs as they're proposed at the moment. In terms of the specific question about how many businesses I've been to, what I would say is I live 5 minutes away from the Cowley Road. I get my hair cut on the Cowley Road, I get food from the Cowley Road, I have drinks in the Cowley Road, I go out repeatedly in the Cowley Road, and I have informal consultation of businesses. And I think there's a larger point that I really want to make here, and I'm going to use my words very carefully. When I talk to local businesses, specifically on the Cowley Road, they do express, not all of them, but some of them, a level of concern about the debate around LTNs. Some of them feel like they're being forced to state a view about LTNs which they do not wholly support, or that they are concerned that if they do not support, they're going to cause ruptions. And I think it's really important that the debate around LTNs is conducted in a really reasonable fashion so that anybody who wants to state their view publicly is perfectly entitled to do so, but they state it in accordance with their own views. Now, like I say, this is not a universal thing across those businesses, but I think it is worth reflecting the fact that this debate has become a little bit soured, and we need to make sure that we recover it.
Councillor Linda Smith, Councillor Hayes, low traffic neighbourhoods, air quality.
Thank you. The response doesn't touch upon vehicle monitoring. At Cabinet earlier this month, you told me that the County Council had told you that they were doing vehicle monitoring both within the LTN areas and the neighbouring areas. Just wondering, do we have any update on that? When might we see any results? And are you actually confident that the work's being done properly?
Thanks. I focused on the air pollution side of things because at the Cabinet meeting I specifically focused on vehicle movements, but you're right, I should have included more about vehicle movements. I'm confident that that work is being done. I'm told that the report will come forward on a quarterly basis, so in the next 2 or so months I would imagine that to be the case. And it is indeed taking place with significant focus, which is being pushed by the City Council. We need to make sure that we're getting a full understanding of the impacts of LTNs, both on air pollution levels, but also traffic flows.
Councillor Malik to Councillor Hayes, low traffic, no it's not, yes it is, low traffic neighbourhood air quality.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thanks for the brief answer and referring to the top one. Could you please provide the location of 14 monitoring location you mentioned to Councillor Smith, Lye Valley, Temple, Cowley and the adjacent areas, and email it to all the councillors or whatever the process you do to choose. Secondly, when you can provide the data of those filters?
So I can tell you the data, the locations of the filters now if you've got a pen and want to scribble them down very quickly. Of course, I can email them later. So they're at the crossing between Towns Road, Oxford Road, Cleveland Drive, Holloway and Bennett Crescents, another just south of Old Road by Holloway, Temple Road by St Christopher's Primary. There are 4 at Cowley Road, 3 at Cowley Iffley Road area, and 2 around the Rose Hill area. I can of course send you an email. What was the second question? When will they be made available? So hopefully the answer that I've given you gives you a fairly clear understanding of that, which is it takes a while to really capture the impact of trends, particularly air quality trends. And so I would imagine it's a good number of months, if not a year, before you actually have that information. The City Council publishes on an annual basis an air quality annual update, and I will seek to make sure that the information is reflected in that.
Councillor Wolf to Councillor Hayes, co-wheels car sharing spaces.
Thank you. No supplementary, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Miles to Councillor Hayes, city centre bike parking.
Thank you for your answer, Councillor Hayes. My understanding is that the City Council has responsibility for cycle parking on pavements, whilst the County Council has responsibility for cycle parking on the highways. And I know that that's a matter that our colleagues are working together on and take seriously. In terms of the city cycle parking and in scope of your responsibilities, would you consider installing cycle parking on the pavement at the intersection of Queen Street, High Street and Cornmarket Street, which seems to currently be the favoured parking position of polluting food delivery mopeds? There are at least 10 out there prior to us coming to the town hall this evening. And secondly, just in scope of the covered market, would you consider exploring accessibility for bike parking for cargo bikes in the entrance to the covered market? Thank you.
Thanks. I'm very happy to consider those things, but I must say that it has to happen within a strategy. And the County Council Cabinet Member, Councillor Bearder, is clear that if there's any extension of the e-scooter trial into the city centre, that's obviously going to take up space in the city centre, which is at a premium already. And the need to social distance at a time of rising case numbers makes the concerns around space even greater. So I'm happy to consider those, but I think it needs to happen in the round. I need to know what the County Council's views are on just exactly where they want to put e-scooter parking, were they to extend into the city centre on the basis of a successful extension around the rest of the city.
Councillor Malik to Councillor Hayes, e-scooter pilot 1.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yeah. Well, what prompted me these list of questions was because I heard your counterpart on the BBC Oxford the other morning before this question put in. He wasn't saying the helmets are necessary. He given the example of some doctors, they're saying cyclists are more in danger wearing the helmet. That was his argument. Secondly, when you say they are not allowed to use the footpaths, what he said was, we haven't found a space for them on the road, so they are riding on the footpath. And soon we allocate a space, they will be on the road. So this contradicts, I'm not saying you telling me wrong, but that's what he said. So I wanted a clarification from you, you see. So I couldn't get onto the radio to question him because they ran out of the time. And the most important thing is who's enforcing them. Because I can see when the people who actually run the show, they wear a helmet to move these scooters around. But the people who hire it, they don't wear any helmet.
I don't know that I can necessarily say whether this is correct or Councillor Bearder was it correct. All I'll say is that I've sent you what I've been given by the County Council. And I didn't quite catch the latter part, sorry.
The last one was who's enforcing it? I mean, if, say for example, they're not allowed to go on the footpath, because I had a meeting with my inspector the other week in my ward, and when I asked him questions, they haven't got the resources to enforce it. So obviously there should be a law or somebody will be enforcing it if they're not been driven adequately.
Thanks. The police should be enforcing it, but you've just put the I don't know what the phrase is actually, you've just hit the nail on the head, that's the one, which is that the police are starved of resources and so they're finding it hard to enforce. I'm happy to pick that up with the police at the local level and make that point.
Councillor Wolf to Councillor Hayes, e-scooter pilot.
No supplementary, Lord. Thank you.
Councillor Wade to Councillor Hayes, Seacourt extension payback period.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The supplementary is, could you advise the timescale for payback of the capital cost? I see from the figures which were produced earlier that there's still 262,000 due to be paid in this financial year, which has slipped from the previous one. So I'm not sure how much is actually owing, but it would be good to know what the payback period is. Thank you.
Thanks. I think the answer would have to be that there isn't a specific period. It may be that it takes longer than anticipated because of all the peculiar effects that the pandemic are having. I think we're all just living with those effects. But as soon as I do have that information, I'll come back to you.
Councillor Wade, Councillor Hayes, Seacourt Extension lighting.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you confirm, Councillor Hayes, that it took a meeting between a local residents leader and the ward councillor before these lights were turned off on the Seacourt Extension?
I don't know. I'd have to ask Councillor Colin Cook, who was responsible for helping to bring that about.
Okay, I'll ask him.
Not now. Councillor Landell Mills to Councillor Hayes, combined emissions and congestion charge.
Yes, please, if I may I ask a sort of follow-on question, please, a supplementary question. It's really, what it is, I appreciate the hard work and the work that has been undertaken, which are in two separate departments, but one is about congestion and one is about air quality. But what I'm hoping, and we don't get the answer to, and I would hope we'd be able to address, is the fact that the technology to make a ZEZ work is very similar to a congestion charge, and actually bringing the two together would, and also with the advances in technology from say 2014, when I think the city last looked at congestion charge, may be actually very efficacious and actually deliver a really good, effective form. And I just hope that we're considering it, giving it fair consideration. I mean, there may be reasons, I don't know, to reject it, but I hope very much that in the conversation between the City Council and the new County Council, a more positive approach with both partners who have a more positive approach to public transport and reducing car use, we can get an effective thing. Thank you.
Thank you. As you can imagine, we've had quite a number of discussions with the new administration, even if it is early on in its time in office. And what I would say is that both administrations are committed to connecting Oxford and the zero emission zone.
Councillor Malik to Councillor Hayes, transport infrastructure investments.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for answering yes. So are you going to develop any policy on this, or are you going to talk to your counterpart?
If you hadn't given me an alternative, I could have just said a second yes. We are obviously talking to the new administration. It's about understanding entirely what their priorities are and working with them to make sure there's alignment of those priorities. But the intent is to develop a strategic approach to traffic management. And we have to do that because we know that we're going to see a significant rise in the number of vehicles on our roads over the next few years unless we take significant strategic action to minimise that.
Councillor Smoten to Councillor Brown, COVID support.
Thank you for the in-depth response. The response lists a number of reasons for rejection from the COVID support scheme. For example, that a person has not lost income, but presumably that abbreviates that they haven't been able to show evidence of loss of income, which may not be the same thing. Have we any idea how many applicants on the balance of probabilities ought to have been eligible, but fell short because of a lack of documentation or the wherewithal to collate it? If there are people falling into that gap, were our processes sufficiently user-friendly?
I think you're actually confusing two separate things, because there is actually a separate item there which says not replied to information request. I think, or withdrew application. So no, I don't think that. I think it means just that. They haven't actually lost income as a result of having had to go into self-isolation. Of course, not everyone will if they've got an understanding employer. I think there has been a huge amount of misinformation about this scheme that's been put out by government, and I think it's not been helped by the advice given to test and trace people who have encouraged people to apply for this scheme in their droves, when the scheme itself is really not fit for purpose. The fact that we've had to turn down so many applicants for this scheme is really quite appalling. And it is a massive discouragement, of course, for people to self-isolate. I would much prefer it that we were been able to help far more people through this scheme, but we have to operate the scheme in the way that the government sets it out. And unfortunately, that means that the vast majority of people who have applied for the scheme are not eligible for it.
Councillor Pegg to Councillor Brown, Afghan Relocation and Assistance Policy.
Yeah, thanks for answering the question. But you noted in your answer that the Afghan relocation scheme does not cover the full costs of providing the necessary to support to those it relocates. And is this the reason why Oxford didn't take part in the scheme, or is there another reason why we didn't take part?
Well, I mean, at the moment, we are very much part of the Syrian resettlement scheme, and we've been taking a lot of action to support Syrian citizens. At the moment, we haven't said one way or the other about the Afghan scheme, other than to say that the government needs to make proper provision under that scheme in order to support people. It's not acceptable to not make proper provision, and along with other councils across the country, we are making that point very firmly to government.
Here, but I believe, Susan, you're going to be answering these. Thank you.
Thanks, my Lord Mayor. Just a brief follow-up. It's a relief to hear about the ability to treat Japanese knotweed. This may be a question, however, which expects the answer no. Can the councillor advise about what type of herbicide is used for treatment of weeds, as referred to in response? If not, a written response would be acceptable.
I am going to have to offer you a written response to that one, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think this is a question which it's going to be difficult for anybody apart from Councillor Arshad to give a reply to, but if I ask the question, then perhaps I could have a written response. The question is whether she or the officers have read reports by Plant Life. There are several reports. This is a big national and international charity, and they're particularly interested in the importance of seeding areas which are grass verges and putting the right seeds in just to get the whole thing started. That's not something that we're doing in Oxford, and so I'd be glad to hear that they have at least read these reports. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I can't answer for Councillor Arshad, as you rightly say, Councillor Wade, but I mean, I do think that this is an issue really for our specialist officers, and their specialist advice is that that isn't the right approach, and that it is actually better for biodiversity to allow natural seeding to take place, and that if you if you intervene by planting seeds, you have to clear the ground, and you potentially introduce non-native species, or you are not necessarily increasing the biodiversity. So whilst I'm happy to ask Councillor Arshad to give you a written response on both whether she's read the documents that you refer to, I think that the most important thing is that we listen to our officers' advice on this, and they are specialists, and they countenance against the approach that you have suggested.
Thank you.
Councillor Malik to Councillor Susan Brown again, Temple Cowley Community Hall.
Yeah, thanks for the answer. She's not here, but I tried to be reasonable as possible with the leader. Well, all these highlighted in the answer, none of them in the Temple Cowley vicinity anyway, where Regal was previously in Cowley Marsh Ward. Regal and Bullingdon, by the way, was built on the same time. And lucky enough for the people in Wood Farm, Lord Mayor, you got a new community centre, but Regal is no more my patch, so I can't fight for them, so I leave to the other councillors. Yeah, I understand there's no budget. There never will be a budget. This is obviously a political decision over 4 or 5 years. If you want to draw a strategy, if there is a will, you can still do it. So I'm very disappointed with the answer, but I will ask the portfolio and the leader to reconsider, because when you look at the future local plans, we still, when the depot move, will be more housing. We have more than fair share of housing. On some stage, if the council can draw the policy, maybe over 2, 3, 4 year time in the budget, eventually we will get a community facility.
I'm not 100% sure there was a question in there, but I'll attempt to answer what there was. I mean, firstly, obviously, Councillor Arshad is very familiar with the needs of her ward and your ward, and is very able to fight its corner and make sure that people there are looked after. I mean, I think the example that you cite, Bullingdon Community Centre, I think is an interesting one in the sense that you're right, it serves people in my ward, Churchill ward, but it isn't in my ward. And I think that that is the case. People don't actually sort of go, there's an invisible line across the road, I'm not going to cross it, and therefore I'm not going to use this facility. So I think ward boundaries are not the thing that we need to measure things by. It is the availability, the walking distance, the cycling distance from people's homes. I mean, I think everywhere in the city, people will always say, more could be done in terms of community facilities, but actually Temple Cowley is not ill-served by the various facilities that are on offer. And we know that Oxford generally is very well served by both community centres and leisure facilities, and that people are very close to both of those things across the whole city. So, I mean, I take the point. Councillor Malik wants to speak on behalf of his constituents and ask for more for them. But, realistically, there has to be some kind of scheme behind this that could actually be offered to people. And at the moment, I'm not aware of one. So I think that if he wishes to put something forward, then that would be the thing to do.
Councillor Pegg to Councillor Arshad again. Plastic packaging and recycling. Susan, you're going to pick this one up?
It's really reassuring to hear that most plastic is recycled in the UK that originates in Oxford. However, looking at the recycling figures that were provided in the answer, could you tell me why 89% of paper and 97% of card are exported outside the UK for recycling?
I can't, but I will ask an officer who can to let you have a response.
Councillor Landell Mills, Councillor Arshad, B Meadows. Susan, you're going to pick this? Okay, thank you. Councillor Goddard to Councillor Arshad, 5 Mile Drive Recreation Ground.
Yeah, thanks, my Lord Mayor. While recognising the point in the Councillor's response about emergency vehicle access and about the arrangements at Wolfcote Bathing Place, may I urge the Councillor, through Councillor Brown, to encourage officers to dig deep. The very fact that these are busy sports pitches, and indeed the fact that the recreation area contains a children's playground, means that it's hugely undesirable for them to be put out of action for any amount of time, let alone, as has happened recently, over entire weekends. So surely a gate like the one that operates in Wolfcote Bathing Place, or some sort of bollards, or something similar, has to be possible there. It can't be impossible. So as I say, may I urge the Councillor to encourage officers to think about this as hard as they can. Thank you.
And I hear what Councillor Goddard is saying, but I'm not sure what solution it is that, it says a gate, but I think the written response makes clear that specific suggestion would not be suitable in this particular location because of the sports pitches and the needs to have emergency vehicle access at all times. So I don't think it's that officers haven't tried to find a solution here. I think they have. And unfortunately, solutions are not easy to find. So, I'm certainly happy to suggest that ward councillors continue to talk to officers about any potential solutions. But I'm not suggesting that it's going to be an easy one to resolve, unfortunately.
Councillor Goddard, Councillor Arshad, no, Mo, May.
And again, thank you, my Lord Mayor. Does the Councillor agree with me that, if only in the interest of making the city's commitment to environmental protection clear and comprehensible to the public in the city, it would be good to do no Mo May next year, public consultation permitting?
I'm happy to ask Councillor Arshad to consider that as part of her cabinet portfolio.
Councillor Jarvis to Councillor Hollingsworth, private rented sector evictions.
No supplementary.
Councillor Jarvis to Councillor Hollingsworth, Oxford North contractors.
And again, no supplementary.
Councillor Pegg to Councillor Hollingsworth, Horsefield standards.
No supplementary.
Councillor Pegg to Councillor Hollingsworth. Horsfield Iffley biodiversity net gain.
Yeah, I understand that planning applications and the challenges they may face isn't entirely decisions that will be made by Councillor Hollingsworth, but given the immense biodiversity on the Horsfield site, does he really think that it is realistic that a planning application will be able to deliver biodiversity net gain?
I think you may have misunderstood my answer. I wasn't suggesting that the planning application would deliver biodiversity net gain. It's a legal requirement of any planning application to demonstrate how biodiversity net gain will be delivered, and this will be no different from any other application.
Councillor Pegg to Councillor Hollingsworth. Horsfield Iffley site damage.
No supplementary.
Councillor Wolfe to Councillor Hollingsworth. Lantham Way passive house standard.
Yes, thank you. I apologise to Councillor Hollingsworth for missing the better thermal standards proposed, so thanks for that correction. However, the second part of Alex's answer is somewhat enigmatic. Passive house developments are already proving viable, so I'm not sure what feasibility work is needed, but then I'm not sure what quote, types of development form means. So could he elaborate? Does this refer to district heating schemes, for instance?
No, it's the difference between houses and flats.
Councillor Jarvis to Councillor Hollingsworth. Lantham Way social rent percentage.
Yeah, no supplementary.
Councillor Pegg to Councillor Hollingsworth. Cycle storage guidance.
No supplementary.
Councillor Malek to Councillor Hollingsworth. Local plan site allocations.
Thank you for the detailed answer. The only question is, I understand when you say we can't predict the outcome of the 2040, obviously we have to follow the relevant procedure. Is anywhere in the council vision or your vision, is any in the local 2040 plan, is any graveyard for the Muslim community? Think about any site or anything will be recommended, you reckon?
Sorry, that was sufficiently left field that I'm unable to think of an answer to it. My understanding is that the council has been in extensive discussions with a landowner about a site for a new cemetery. That isn't part of the local plan process. No site in the city has been identified for a new cemetery in the local plan. This particular site is outside the city, but the details of where we are at in negotiations with that landowner and indeed the relevant local planning authority aren't under my remit, but another councillor in the cabinet who I can't think at the moment. I think it's Councillor Upton, judging by the fact she's turned round.
Councillor Arshad.
I know it's Councillor Arshad. Sorry. Okay. Can I suggest that Councillor Arshad provides you with a written response, but it's got nothing to do with the local plan.
Thank you.
Councillor Goddard to Councillor Hollingsworth. Tree preservation.
Thank you for the answer. No supplementary.
Councillor Landell Mills to Councillor Brown. Public conveniences.
Thank you for the information. Would it be possible to have a written answer giving the times of opening and closing? Because I think though there's quite good provision of the actual infrastructure, they're often shut, and I don't know what I mean, could I have a written answer with the times of, because especially during, I think, with a lot of shops and restaurants closed, it makes life harder for people.
I'm sure that we could arrange for the times to be put up on the council website and a link sent to the councillor. Actually, since signing off this answer, I've noticed the other day that the Magdalen Street ones do appear to be open, so I'm not sure it's entirely happening.
Councillor Miles, Councillor Brown, Town Hall Art.
Thank you, Councillor Brown, for your detailed answer. I'd encourage the Council, first of all, just to review the numbers. Easy mistake, but the breakdown of portraits by males and females doesn't seem to add up. Nonetheless, very much the status of the imbalance is clear, with only 3 portraits of females out of a total of 45 in the Town Hall. With this in mind, does the Council agree, firstly, to establish an informal cross-party working group to formulate a plan to address the gender and ethnic diversity of paintings in the Town Hall, so that they better represent the diversity of our city's population and also the Council in the room today? And secondly, recognising the Council's resource constraints, will the Council support the commissioning of a crowd-funded portrait, or indeed a series of portraits, of prominent females from Oxford, including potentially also those from ethnically diverse backgrounds, to make a small step in redressing this current existing imbalance? For example, one idea to put forward is the females from the Oxford vaccine team that have contributed to the global COVID response efforts. And secondly, another idea is a portrait of NHS staff from the ICU at the John Radcliffe Hospital. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miles, for your second supplementary question. I mean, I think the first thing is I'll say you're right, the numbers don't add up. Jennifer and I identified that just before council, so apologies for that. We're still trying to work out which ones we haven't counted, but we'll try and get something. But as you say, the gist is correct, that it is a huge imbalance of men to women, and they are not diverse in any other sense either. I mean, I think this is a real problem for us because we have recognised for many years that the art in the town hall is not in the slightest bit representative of our city or indeed our council. If you look around this room, where we're considerably more diverse in every sense than you would see from the portraits in the town hall. But as I stated in the answer to the question, there is an issue because we are a listed building. And this is problematic when it comes to replacing the art on the walls. It means that we have to go through various processes in order to do that. And that is where we are at the moment, is taking advice on what we can do with an aim to sort of try and get as much flexibility as we possibly can. But it might mean that it would be easier to swap in existing paintings or pieces of art which are framed in a similar way to the arts that we have in Town Hall. It's to do with the frames rather than the content, as I understand it, that is the issue. I mean, if once we have that advice, I think that it would be possible to look to see if we set something up to have some kind of informal discussions and exchange of ideas. But I would just say that whilst I find it personally extremely irritating that we're surrounded by portraits of that do not represent our city as it is today, I just can't see that would ever be a priority for us in terms of spending money in our city. So whatever we come up with has to be at zero cost to the council. And I think that has to be one of our stated aims in making any decision about this in the future, which is why I suggested when I was raising this with officers a couple of months ago that we looked at swapping art with various other institutions or loans of existing works of art. If someone wants to donate art to us, then that's of course welcome as well. But again, it would have to fit, unfortunately, the requirements of a listed building. So it would best be done in close consultation with those responsible for maintaining the town hall. So I thank you for the suggestions and the offer. We will come back once we've got some further answers on precisely what we can do. Sorry, it was a very lengthy answer, but thank you.
Last but not least, Councillor Landell Mills, Councillor Brown, air-conditioned emergency shelters.
Thank you for your answer, which is quite detailed, but I'm just, in light of the very disturbing pictures we got from Portland on the west coast of Canada, the prospect of a heat dome doesn't actually seem that, an extreme heat wave doesn't seem that unreasonable an event. And I think unless we have some sort of provision for this, we're going to have very high level, we'll have fatalities, significant numbers of fatalities in our country. And we really need to do something about it. And I think I think it will be the homeless people that falls under the City Council's area of responsibility, but it's something that we might do with the County Council as well.
Was there a question there, Lord Mayor?
I don't think there was.
I'll try. Do you think we'll actually, at the moment there's discussion, but will there be any, is there any date or outcomes likely to happen soon? I suppose would be the...
Okay, so...
There's a procedural, there's a description of procedure, but not an actual action.
Because the way that emergency planning works is that there are procedures in place to deal with all sorts of different eventualities, including this, and that will be scaled up and down as necessary. I mean, there are a number of large air-conditioned buildings around our city, which in an emergency the county and city councils could put into use for this purpose. But are we going to start building enormous air-conditioned shelters in our city? No, because that's not something that we have the finances to do. I think the councillor raises some important points because we clearly are in a time where we are now seeing an increased effect of climate change on the world, including our own country, and we've obviously sitting here today in hotter weather than we've been used to across the UK for some time, although not quite as hot as last week, thankfully. We do need to be preparing for these events, but there are all sorts of things that we need to do in terms of planning for them, including making sure that the houses that we build in the future are better prepared for this sort of extreme climate change. And I think those are the actions that we can best take as a city at the moment, as well as continuing to work really closely with our emergency planning partners to make sure that, as and when, and let's hope it's never, we face such an eventuality, we're in a good position to work together to make that sort of provision, just as we have through the COVID pandemic, where, almost overnight we housed every person who wanted to be housed off the streets of Oxford. Just to emphasise the point, because you mentioned homeless people, we have made sure that all of those who work with rough sleepers in the city have been offering extra support to people during this extreme weather, including water and places where they can go during the daytime for shelter. So, we do take our responsibilities as a city seriously in terms of looking after our citizens. That's why we have these emergency planning processes in place, and we'll continue to do so. But that doesn't mean that we need to start now in terms of building a special shelter. We would make sure that we use the buildings that we have already.
Thank you. Right, we're now going to take a break for 30 minutes. If you could please be seated for 7 o'clock. Thank you. Okay, welcome back everybody. That takes us on to item 15, public addresses and questions. And the first one is addressed by Linda Booker.
Me while I just bring it up. Sorry. Get on there. The Lord Mayor and Councillors. Do the most deprived people in Oxford really need more housing, or do they require alternative investment with access to employment and income, access to education, skills and training, and access to health and disability services, as well as crime prevention investment? We are residents from within Blackbird Leys are calling on the government to interject and stop the development of almost 300 homes within Blackbird Leys and Northfield Brook wards, which form Blackbird Leys parish. We do, of course, have many reasons as to why this project should not go ahead. There are over 5,000 homes situated in the parish with almost 14,000 residents. The residents have 1 doctor's surgery, 3 primary schools and 1 college, along with the secondary school placed just outside the parish boundaries in Littlemore. Firstly, the people of Blackbird Leys and Northfield Brook suffer immense amount of deprivation in many ways. The residents of Northfield Brook are positioned as the most deprived people in the whole of Oxford, while also sitting in the top 10 of the most deprived across the country. The people of Blackbird Leys follow shortly behind the top 20% bracket of the most deprived in the country. Residents of Northfield Brook and Blackbird Leys wards combined have 5 from 8 of the lower super output areas, LSOA, within the top 10% bracket, and 2 from 8 within the top 20% bracket, and most deprived across the country when it comes to deprivation of education, skills and training. Secondly, when it comes to crime, income, employment, health deprivation in Blackbird Leys, residents across the 3 out of the 4 LSOAs are within the top 30% nationally of being deprived across the board, with at least 1 area being within the top 20%. Thirdly, residents in 5 from 8 of the LSOAs across both Northfield Brook and Blackbird Leys wards are rated at 40% deprived or better. When it comes to deprivation within barriers, the housing services, furthermore, statistics from End Child Poverty estimate that 45.2% of children are living in poverty in Blackbird Leys, as well as 44.6% within Northfield Brook, calculated after housing costs. Lastly, this project is set to sacrifice recreational land to form housing, as well as an immense reduction in the size of the community centre, with such an increase in property numbers leading to an increase in residential population. This project also seeks to further reduce the community opportunities At the same time, this project is set to bring no direct employment opportunities for the local community, no educational investment for children or adults, no investment into the local health services, and finally, no investment into the prevention of local crime rates. Bearing all this in mind, it appears that there is a severe lack of investment within the community that already exists. It would therefore be unreasonable and completely unnecessary if Oxford City Council were to go ahead with their plans to squeeze almost 300 homes into an area where investment is clearly needed in people rather than market sales and affordable catalyst rented homes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Your 5 minutes is up. Was there anything just... Okay. Hand over straight over to Councillor Hollingsworth.
Lord Mayor and Council, I've provided a written response which I am happy to read out if you so wish. I think people are nodding, so I will.
No. Sorry, I mean it's not to read out. If you're happy not to read it out, we've all read it and we can move on to the next speaker.
Lord Mayor, we've also all read the correspondence from the Speaker. I think it would be polite for anyone watching to share the response.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Okay, I'm happy to read it out. More homes are needed across the whole of Oxford. Alongside new homes must come access to employment, education, training and health services for all. And that is why the Council is working, both using its own resources and together with partners like the County Council and the NHS, to deliver all of these alongside the new homes. The Blackbird Leys scheme itself will deliver wider benefits in the local area. For example, we're working with our development partner Catalyst, with Job Centre Plus, local schools and in particular the City of Oxford College, to ensure that it will generate local employment during its construction, including through the delivery of apprenticeships, traineeships, reskilling, mentoring and support for local people. The scheme is delivering a new public square, enhanced cycle and pedestrian facilities, and the square will be integrated with a new community centre to broaden the range of activities on offer and to include active play spaces and areas for community events to take place. Both the shopping and the community centre buildings are nearing the end of their life, and their existing layout and design does not work well for current users. Replacing these with new spaces that work better for retailers and for users of the community centre alike will be a significant benefit for the community. We know from feedback we have received that the current community centre design is restrictive and is inefficient. As well as being more flexible and therefore more open for a wider range of uses and groups, the new community centre has been designed to be zero carbon, which will make it more affordable to run. We have appointed a team that is dedicated to working with local people and with local groups to develop the design and use of the community centre to ensure that it is as local people want and need it. The scheme is delivering a range of new homes to address the need for affordable housing. Over 50% will be for social rent, and just to be clear for people, that is council house rent levels. Will be for social rent to those on the council's housing register in greatest need, and a further 25% will be for shared ownership to help local people onto the housing ladder. At present, there are 3,165 homes on our housing register, and 16% of those are from the Blackbird Leys and Northfield Brook wards, double the average for wards across the city. It is local people in the Leys who stand to benefit most from the new housing. This scheme is extremely locally important in delivering long-term changes to support the community. The new community centre, public square, shops and the new homes are an opportunity for real change and also aim to encourage wider investment in the future.
Thank you. And we have the second address by Evelyn Sanderson, Friends of Iffley Fields.
Over the summer, shoppers in Broad Street can enjoy broad meadow thanks to you. But Broadmeadow is a fake. It is only a fast food meadow for rapid consumption, and in September it will be gone. How careless we are with our meadows. In the UK, 90% of wildflower meadows have been lost. On the other hand, here in Oxford, we have the last remaining ancient meadows in Iffley village. These meadows are full of wildlife and protected species. They soak up rainwater and capture carbon. They form a nature corridor along the Thames and are bordered by a designated quiet route for up to 900 people every day. They are real, living, evolving meadows, nourishing humans as well as nature at a time of crisis for both. So the question is simple: do we value them or ruin them? It's entirely up to you. The word Iffley means meadows of gifts in Anglo-Saxon. As unploughed wildflower meadows, they have been giving to residents and visitors to Oxford the gift of nature long before the Doomsday Book. It is a gift you would think the council would value, but no. With just a cursory look over the gate, you allocated them for 30 houses. Last year, you bought them for an astonishing £4.5 million. Now, OCHL has already started their destruction with invasive assessments. Destroying the meadows in Iffley for the promise of only 12 houses for social rents does not add up. Moreover, it is a poor site for efficient land use due to the limitations of building in a conservation area and on the edge of a floodplain. The real reason for development on this high-value land is profit. Council leader Susan Brown has written to us saying that it is acceptable to make money out of green spaces in the city, to which we respond with incredulity. Really? At a time of climate emergency? Really? Even when they make up a major contribution to the quality of life for so many? We can all agree that Oxford urgently needs more genuinely affordable housing. People in Iffley are not opposed to the 84 houses planned on the former Iffley Mead playing field just 200 metres away from the horsefields. But where should development stop? Where is the destructive threshold beyond which we lose what is of value in terms of heritage, biodiversity and community? Indeed, your own planning policy dictates that any development should preserve and enhance this rural conservation area. Building here is clearly contrary to this policy, as well as to the Council's other policies on biodiversity, green infrastructure, green-blue corridor, and climate and ecological emergencies. We have a better idea. In March this year, Friends of the Fields Iffley wrote to the shareholders and joint ventures committee who oversee the ostensibly independent Oxford City housing, asking them to allow the community time to fundraise to buy this land. I would point out there is a legal requirement in the condition of sale for the council to, I quote, consider the views of the local community and that the development meets local need. We were not favoured with a reply. Your council did not take the views of the local community into account. More than 9,000 people signed the petition to save these fields, yet your committee ignored our offer to preserve forever a resource to benefit community and nature for many more people than 12 houses for social rent. Councillors, what you have in this forum this evening is a formal way to listen to concerns. A listening council is what all communities deserve. A listening council which acts on what it hears rather than resorts to party doctrine. We have two requests with widespread community support. Firstly, to allow us to fundraise to buy both the Horsefields and Memorial Field as a community asset, to provide educational opportunities, to promote well-being, and to regenerate this rare habitat. And secondly, to review the 2036 local plan, using the same environmental principles you are now consulting on for the 2040 plan. Reassess land use following COVID in keeping with your declaration of climate emergency. Repurpose old buildings, release and regenerate brownfield sites currently ring-fenced for employment to provide the genuinely affordable homes that Oxford needs. Do councillors wish for a legacy that concretes over our city irrespective of the wishes and needs of local people and our planet? There is only one Oxford, and many other groups, including those in Marston and Blackbird Leys, are fighting both individually and together for the green spaces we need and value in our city. Or instead, will you choose to do your duty to review land use in the 2036 local plan and empower the wider community in Iffley to provide an inclusive and equitable resource for education and well-being, and to help restore the natural world on which we all depend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. That wasn't quite delivered as written, but I think the same basic points were covered, albeit in a different order. So I'll just read my existing response. The site at Meadow Lane in Iffley was allocated for housing in the Oxford Local Plan 2036 after an extensive process of development of the evidence base, repeated rounds of consultation and an exhaustive public examination process. The site was proposed for allocation by its then owners and was assessed carefully using objective criteria that were applied to all potential sites in Oxford and was found to be suitable for careful development. The same objective processes of assessment were used by neighbouring councils before they assigned sites in their local plans for housing to meet the need for new homes that could not be wholly met in Oxford. Well over 50% of Oxford's housing need is being provided for on sites outside Oxford, something that involves decisions for the local authorities involved that are just as difficult as for allocations inside Oxford. The land at Meadow Lane having been allocated for development, the owners decided to sell it, and the successful bidder was Oxford City Homes Limited, the City Council's wholly owned housing development company. Had OCHL not been successful, then a private developer would have acquired the land and developed it themselves. While we cannot know if they would have pursued the same high environmental standards for the new homes as OCHL, or the same proportion of affordable and social housing, we do know one thing: that any profit that they would have made would have gone to private shareholders and not, as with OCHL, to support the continuation of vital frontline services for the people of Oxford. As the question makes clear, the main financial beneficiary of the allocation of the site has been the former landowner, who sold it for £4.5 million. Any return that OCHL makes will be a tiny fraction of that, but given the choice, I would rather that return went to the City Council to pay for services than to private shareholders of a commercial developer. The need for new homes demonstrated in the evidence base for Oxford's Local Plan 2036 was more than double the capacity of the city to provide sites for it, even with policies to increase densities and building heights in district centres. The sole driver for that need was the need for affordable and social housing. The City Council has started work on its 2040 local plan and will of course be reviewing the evidence base for housing need as part of that process. But I don't believe that it is in any way plausible that the need for affordable and social housing will suddenly and inexplicably have dropped by such an extent that Oxford will be able to accommodate all its housing needs without calling on its neighbours for help. In the circumstances where other local authorities are having to make difficult decisions to allocate sites for development in their areas to meet Oxford's needs, I cannot see any justification for applying one rule for assessing a site's suitability for development in Oxford, whilst asking for a different standard outside.
Thank you. Okay, we now have Roger Crisp, Friends of Old Marston.
My Lord Mayor and councillors, good evening and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. My name's Roger Crisp and I represent the Friends of Old Marston, a group of residents and visitors which aims to preserve the unique qualities of the village. If you don't know Old Marston already, I do hope you'll come to see it. As the council's own appraisal of the conservation area said in 2012, its isolation until the building of the Marston Ferry Road in the 1970s has enabled it to keep much of its green and rural character, at least as far as its surroundings and buildings go. Many old fields remain, and it has a good number of historic buildings, including several which played an important part in the Civil War. But over the last few decades, living in our village has become increasingly dangerous, unhealthy, and unpleasant because of the thousands of rat-running drivers who ignore the access-only signs at both ends of the village. Especially during rush hours, long queues of traffic build up through the whole village. Accidents are frequent and sometimes serious, especially to cyclists and pedestrians who have to weave their way through cars and lorries trying to pass on the narrow pavements and roads, made narrower by parked cars, as well as the chicanes, which of course are there to keep the speeds down. Given the existing traffic problems, we were surprised that the Council's 2036 local plan allocated land for building down one of the narrowest and most dangerous roads in Oxford, Mill Lane. As some of you will know, it's effectively single track from its junction with the main through road until a double-blind bend right in the middle of the conservation area. We know that the County Council, or at least the head of transport in the County Council, told the city before the plan was finalised that such buildings would be, as far as transport is concerned, unsustainable. At least the local plan did require that permission depended on its being shown that 2 cars could pass along the duration of Mill Lane. Nevertheless, despite that conditions not having been met, and despite the county's view that developments are unsustainable here, the city's own planning committee recently voted to accept, albeit by only 1 vote, an application for a new estate of 159 houses at Hillview Farm. While the case officer who presented the development to the committee had participated in meetings with the developer, we have never been properly consulted, and the developer and the committee members refused to meet us. Because of COVID, all we were offered were 2 short internet meetings, which many older and poorer people in the village could not attend. We pointed out that the development would extend by nearly 1 hectare into unallocated green belt, but were ignored. This is poor governance, and we are continuing to look into all possible avenues to protect residents, especially children, cyclists, older people, and the many disabled wheelchair and mobility scooter users from Bradlands and elsewhere. Had we been consulted, we would have said very clearly that we do not object to new homes being built in Old Marston, but only homes that don't add significant traffic, are affordable, and are designed for workers in the city who currently have to commute in, especially key workers at local schools and hospitals. The council itself has now applied for permission for another estate, this time of 80 houses, again accessible only from Mill Lane. But there is still no transport solution. Time is running out for all of us, as the terrible flooding in Germany and elsewhere has shown recently, and it's certainly running out in Old Marston. We're now appealing to you all, a newly formed council with forward-looking ideas, to review these planning decisions on grounds of unsustainability and to encourage the developer at Hillview Farm to put in another proposal more in line with the values of the council and those whom it represents, as well as a public transport plan for residents, which would also help those at Bradlands and make it a place people actually want to live. The council has a chance here to do something imaginative and positive, something which it can be proud of now rather than ashamed of in the future.
Thank you, Roger. Alex?
Yep, I'll do as I did before. The address raises a number of issues that I will try to address in turn. Following concerns raised by the County Council, planning officers worked with the applicant and the County Council to ensure the options regarding 2 vehicles passing on Mill Lane during the life of the application. After much investigation, it was accepted that the main impacts would be during the construction phase of the development and that this could be dealt with through a construction traffic management plan. As a result, the County Council did not make an objection to the planning application as presented to the Planning Committee on the 26th of May 2021. A representative from County Highways attended the committee which considered this application and addressed at some considerable length questions raised by members on this issue. Clearly, the COVID-19 pandemic had an effect on the applicant's ability to engage with the wider community. However, officers were satisfied that the actions taken by the applicant met the required legal standard, including engagement in writing with bodies such as Oxford Civic Society and Old Marston Parish Council. The application was accompanied by a statement of community involvement which set this out in full. The council, the city council that is, also undertook its statutory duty of advertising the application as it was originally submitted and once it had been amended. All comments received as a result of that publicity were taken into consideration, summarised and addressed within the committee report, including a representation from Friends of Old Marston, among others. Members of the public also had the opportunity to address the committee, and those who took that opportunity were the Friends of Old Marston, Marston Parish Council and the Elsfield Road, Oxford Road and Old Marston Residents Association. The report to the Planning Committee clearly set out the assessment of the impact upon the Greenbelt. The development itself is contained within the applicant's application site's red line, including the necessary public open space provision as required by policy SP25 of the local plan. The land outside the red line does not form part of the development in itself, but instead provides the Greenbelt compensation measures required by national and local planning policy. Any Greenbelt compensation measures would by definition need to be off-site, and as the applicant owns the adjoining land, it was considered an acceptable approach. The development does not encroach onto unallocated Greenbelt land, as was made clear at the Planning Committee. The application complies with the relevant local plan and policies in terms of the provision of affordable housing. There is no compulsion for any development under those policies to be solely for affordable housing, solely for current residents, or solely key worker housing only. Nevertheless, it provides much needed housing and affordable housing at the levels required under the Oxford local plan policies. The application referred to at Mill Lane is a current and live planning application being considered by planning officers. The application has been consulted on publicly in accordance with statutory requirements and will be reported to the Planning Committee in due course. The Planning Committee has already resolved to grant the application at Hillview Farm planning permission, subject to the completion of the Section 106 legal agreement. There are no grounds or mechanisms in law to revisit that decision unless there is a material change in planning policy, which there has not been nor likely to be. The Council cannot require the applicant to submit another scheme. Both of these application sites were allocated for housing in the Oxford Local Plan 2036, which underwent rigorous testing, several rounds of consultation, including with community groups in Old Marston, and was then found to be sound at the local plan examination and adopted by the City Council. Contrary to the suggestion in the address, the County Council as the Highways Authority did not make a formal objection to the inclusion of these sites in the local plan.
Thank you very much, Alex. Okay, it takes us on to item 16, which is the Partnership Report, Health and Wellbeing Board and Health Improvement Board. And Councillor Upton is going to present this.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, so in brief, the Oxfordshire Health and Wellbeing Board...
Sorry, Louise. We can't, unfortunately not, we can't do that. There is a process of doing this and this isn't it now. I'm sorry. Please take a seat. Please take a seat. Thank you. Councillor Upton, carry on please.
Thanks. So this board, it brings together local authorities, that's the county and the district, elements of the health service, so our hospital trusts and GPs and social care. It has a very wide remit for improving the health and the well-being, both physical and mental, of the whole county. And it does everything from keeping an eye on things like bowel cancer screening rates to ensuring our domestic abuse services are comprehensive and joined up. So the Health and Wellbeing Board operates by, it commissions a joint strategic needs assessment each year, which is a really detailed look at the county, and it's good enough to identify the little pockets of inequality that exist within, what might otherwise be seen as a wealthy county, and uses the information from that to develop its strategy, which for improving health and well-being, and that is delegated down to various boards, and you'll have seen the structure of those boards in the report. Obviously, this last year has been extraordinary. The sands have been shifting underneath people's feet as we've gone through it. So some of the things that normally would be done have not been able to be done. Many new things needed to be done. Some problems look like they've mysteriously disappeared and then only reappeared as we came back out of lockdown, worse than they were before. But the upside of the pandemic has really been to show how all sorts of partners can work together in all sorts of ways that we would never have thought of beforehand, like our officers supporting GP practices by doing vaccine information outreach, things like that. So the Health and Wellbeing Board has, I think it's recognised the huge contribution that councils make to health, and you can see in the report some of the many ways that this council has contributed to health. You know, for things like vaccinating our homeless population when the government was saying they weren't a priority, improving air quality, providing free swimming lessons. I think our locality hubs that we set up really speedily, which have kept many vulnerable people fed, kept them warm. So, yes, this council has done many things, and you'll see in the report, it's a really comprehensive report, and I think we should thank our excellent officers, Danny Granito and Mish Tuller, who put it together. There's a lot of stuff in there. I could perhaps highlight just a couple of things. The Health Improvement Board, one of those sub-boards, is the one that really focuses both on inequalities, but crucially on prevention.
30 seconds, Louise.
Oh, thank you. Right. Prevention, that's keeping people healthier for longer, and rather than treating them when they've got things. I was going to say, within that goal, our active communities team's done loads of good things, and I was going to give you a name check, Mark, because Move with Mayor Mark campaign has been one of those things which has really stressed the importance of physical activity every day. I'm very proud of lots of things we've done on the domestic abuse, in response to the new Domestic Abuse Act. One thing that concerns me is the county's mental health services, which were struggling beforehand, and of course it's just worse now. So the Health and Wellbeing Board have sent officers away to come up with some radical plan of how that's going to be put back on track. That's mental health services.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor?
Thank you. Councillor Miles speaking. Thank you, Councillor Upton. Firstly, an acknowledgement and thanks. And I personally would like to acknowledge the report and thank the Health Protection Board and the locality hubs and the council for its work over the last year in terms of the COVID response for the pandemic, both protecting people in Oxford, the wider county and beyond. So first of all, thank you. And also, I think it's important to welcome and thank those responsible for the work detailed in the report in light of the new duty which you mentioned on local authorities with the aim of ensuring all victims of domestic abuse have access to the right support. So thank you for that. This is particularly important given the increase in domestic abuse that has resulted from the pandemic. So once again, thank you. A point of clarification, the focus of active travel, which I'm sure we all welcome within scope of their health place shaping approach, which is mentioned. It's mentioned in one of the paragraphs, but the priority is absent from the City Council's priorities, and just wanted to know whether and why this was the case, and whether it's actually covered by one of the other bullet points in the list of the City Council's future priority areas. And the second question is the extent to which either to date or going forward, climate change related health impacts have been considered by the board. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mills. Sorry, I didn't quite understand the first question. You were asking why isn't active travel?
Yeah, so it's mentioned as a sort of a priority and focus within the health place shaping approach, but then there is a list, I think it's in paragraph 71 on page 67 of the City Council's future priority areas, and active travel isn't specifically called out, and I just wondered, does it fall under one of the bullet points that is listed there, or is it an absent from the priorities?
Sorry, I can't immediately see the bullet points. Page 61, did you say?
67, I think, paragraph 71. And we can address this offline as well. Yeah, don't worry about that, that's absolutely fine.
I mean, yes, you can give me the detail of what the question is, but I mean, yes, a healthy place shaping agenda is very important and has been embedded in various policies across the different districts. There's sort of Barton Healthy Newtown, Bicester Healthy Newtown have both incorporated various elements, and we're busy evaluating which of those elements have worked best and which ones are worth repeating across the county. Okay, and the second question, and now I've forgotten that. Sorry.
The extent to which climate change related health impacts have either been considered to date or will be considered by the board. I mean, particularly in light of some of the health impacts resulting from flooding, for instance, or other longer term health impacts that are being documented in the international media at the moment.
That's a very interesting question. I don't think it has been particularly looked at. I guess you're referring to something Councillor Landell-Mills was talking about earlier about if we're going to have heat waves, what are we going to do about keeping people safe in that, which I'm sure is going to involve lots of public information campaigns. It's not going to involve, as we have heard, it's not going to involve building large air-conditioned stadiums. But thank you. That is something I will take away and think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder, just go through the chair, please. Thank you. Councillor Wolfe, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Question of obesity and the healthy weight aspect of the work. I actually was very struck by this on a visit to Weymouth recently when it was very, very apparent. The average weight of the Weymouth citizen was at least two or 3 kilos more than it is in Oxford. But it's a serious matter, as we know, because of the impact. And I noticed that under the heading in your report, it says reducing inequalities and obesity through physical activity. And we know that there is a link, a proven link between poverty and obesity, which I'm not an expert on. I'm puzzled about how that happens and stuff. I probably ought to know. In the report, all the focus is on physical activity, which of course is part of the picture. But I would have thought that actually diet and food is very much at the centre of that. And we've been talking about having a food strategy. So I'm just wondering whether there are any tie-ups between this report and food strategy thinking and diet and its relation with poverty. I mean, it's a bit of a nexus of different interlocking things, I know. But anything you can say on that would be very useful. And if I'm asking too much in this meeting, maybe something in an email or something.
In an email would be fine, please, Louise.
Can I say just one thing?
Go on.
Thank you. I am delighted you asked that question because I've just taken over being the chair of the Health Improvement Board, and I've just put on our forward plan that we need to have a food strategy because, that, as you say, that's absolutely an important part of the equation, physical activity, but healthy eating as well. Thank you.
She's answered the question, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Landell-Mills, please.
Thank you for this report, which is, I think, very comprehensive and informative. An area which perhaps it would be interesting to see expanded, and I think is well worth looking at, is that of the benefit. You talk about physical activity, but it's really the ability to have informal, what might be dubbed informal recreation, and using the open spaces and parks better so that people can access them in a way. And there's, I think, two things that really inhibit, especially in areas of deprivation, people using these, is one, the provision of some sort of, park keepers, basically people feeling safe and letting their children go out and feeling safe about that. And which, and has suffered very much because of cutbacks in costs. And the other thing is provision of, this is the second time I'm mentioning it, public lavatories, because people don't like going to places where they're going to get caught short, and especially and so that limits the things. And those two things are actually, if you think of how much it unlocks the potential of parks and open space, which is quite a cheap form of entertainment and health-giving thing, it's very. I regard it as a very cost-effective way of accessing physical benefits.
Sorry, Mark. I'm now waiting for you because you told me I should do it through you. Can I speak now?
The floor is all yours, Louise.
Thank you. Yes, I don't think people feel unsafe generally about going to parks in the daytime, so I don't think we need park keepers permanently stationed in all our parks. But I will be open to hearing people who do think that. Public toilets, yes, that is something. So some of them do have them, but not all of them. Some of the ones that are used very locally, that's fine because people can just pop home to the loo. But it's true that we could, yeah, that's something we should talk to Councillor Arshad, who's now in charge of parks, about. But one good thing we are working up at the moment, our active communities team is putting together going to be putting together a map of the green and blue spaces and nice routes to get to them from all around the city, which I hope will make them much more accessible to everybody.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Sorry, that's very long. I was making sure it was the right Smith. Thank you, and thank you for the report.
Sorry, can I ask you just to speak into the microphone, please?
Right, okay. Sorry, being a bit politically challenged. Is that better? Can you hear me now? Right, thank you. So thank you for the report and taking on the chair. It's a very important role. I'm focusing on the City Council's future focus and the paragraph there, 66, 67, on pages 66, 67. And it talks about having ambitions, which is good. It talks about strong interest in council involvement and engagement in Oxfordshire. It talks about an appetite to increase the focus on tackling health inequalities across all areas of the council service delivery, and absolutely good to see that. And influence wider decision making on health through members and policy, and again through influencing on the council's policy and partnership team with friends. And then it goes on and looks at those 5 areas of focus. And then 72, the financial implications for this council. There are no financial implications for this council, for this report. Does that mean that this council will not be putting financial support behind some of these very, very worthwhile ambitions?
I think it means that we already have officers in place who are tasked with doing many of these things. We have, so our active communities team and sport and physical development officers already exist. And things that are happening in our locality hubs, are already happening. We have got, I think it mentions somewhere in the report, 20 more groups operating, doing exercise classes in parks, things like that. So I think we're hoping that we will be able to fulfill a lot of these wishes without employing new staff.
Councillor Malik, then Councillor Wade.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment. I think it's a wonderful report, and thanks for doing the great work. I'm just looking forward on the way you said 7.1 on page 67, moving forward, the council areas the focus will be. Although all the 5 points are very important, but number 4 is also important, mental health and well-being, especially what we've been through the lockdown. So it has affected all age, from young age to any age group, because people been, shut in through pandemic, etc. And I think this also needs work doing. What my concern is, I know there was a time when we needed to shut all the toilets, and we did, because the money strain. But going forward, again, I just want to reiterate, we don't want to be seen as a council leaving the disabled, the frail, who have any medical issues, they can't stay much longer and need to use a toilet facility, or family with small children. So our park somewhere, maybe we don't want to open the shut ones, maybe council can consider and think about the idea putting 20, 50 those cubicles where only work certain times, so it doesn't attract any antisocial behavior. Say, for example, the parks are reasonably open for 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, then after automatically they shut. But during that time, 8 in the morning till 8 o'clock night or whatever, people who are using the parks can have the facility to go if they needed to. Thank you.
Thanks, absolutely. Yeah, and I take that point, and I think particularly as our population ages, and we know as people get older, we all need to pee more often. So I think that we do need to look at
and I will talk that over with whoever is in charge of the policy on public conveniences. Thank you.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. It's a question about setting up a pilot drug consumption room. I know that we can't do it by ourselves. It has to be government legislation. But I know it's something that you and I happen to agree on quite strongly, and you were hoping to take it up with the Health Improvement Board. And now you're the chair of the board, I wondered if it had been possible to make any progress on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wade. Well, no immediate progress, let's say that, because absolutely it would require probably a change in government legislation. But I think the first step is to see, I want to get an understanding of how much of a health problem it is, and how much of a, I mean, I think it is primarily a health problem, but how much the police would support this, because I imagine that dealing with drugs takes up a huge amount of their time, and I think before we were going to advance that any further, would have to have the police on board. But this is something that I haven't particularly discussed this with any of my colleagues here, so we need to have a really good think about that before we press on with that.
Thank you. Any more questions from the floor? Okay, we are going to vote to note, and just your hands this time. So you won't be moving with Mayor Mark, but just raising your hands. Okay, those all in favour? Okay, item 17, Scrutiny Committee update. Councillor Wade, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Since the last update to Council, scrutiny has met on 2 occasions, on the 8th of June and the 14th of July. The second meeting was bedevilled by poor acoustics. We were in this chamber and it didn't go well. I'm not hearing everything tonight, which is a slight worry, but I don't know what can be done about it. This may just be me, but it may be that other members around the room are having the same difficulty, but we soldier on, as we did with the Scrutiny Committee. And if I had realised how poor the acoustics were at the Scrutiny Committee, we would probably have adjourned it for a different date. Anyhow, we didn't, we carried on. So we've had 2 meetings. They've been good meetings. It's a new committee. Only 1 member has actually survived since the last scrutiny, and we've got 3 former cabinet members, so we have a lot of experience to draw on, which is very helpful. The 2 reports that we looked at on the 8th of June were transformation of rough sleeping and single homelessness, and the annual safeguarding report, and we had excellent reports on both these. On the homeless issues, Cabinet accepted our recommendations, which were to learn from work being done in Derby, to seek out the best advisors for a new and very complex area of work, and to ensure that the Council and its companies develop the necessary skills to manage these services. That's what we want to do. We want our services to be in the vanguard of this, but that's going to need a lot of training and a lot of manpower, I think, person power. So we also recommended some increased political accountability within the management structure. This could only be partly agreed because it was not within the City Council's gift, although we are assured that every effort will be made to ensure accountability. There were 2 recommendations on the safeguarding report. One very important recommendation was to make more data available in the public report. This would give a framework for the public to understand how well the Council was doing. It's not enough just to know what our successes are. We have to know everything else about the situation. We have to know about failures, and we have to know about not managing very well. I think that makes a huge difference to the confidence of our local public in us. The other recommendation was that no information about victims of human trafficking should be used for immigration enforcement. This was a more difficult recommendation because information sometimes needed to be shared with other supporting agencies, but there had been no evidence of such information getting back to immigration enforcement. This recommendation was therefore only partially agreed. Nobody doubted that immigration enforcement should not be involved at any point, but it's difficult to actually make a proper Chinese wall, and we understood that.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate
Right.
that. Thank you. Any questions? Comments? Susan?
Apologies, Lord Mayor. It was a comment, really. We had a good discussion at Cabinet about some of the issues that had arisen at scrutiny, including the challenges about people being heard. I was disappointed at the break of this meeting to be told that lots of people had been struggling to hear me, but no one spoke up again. So I don't know what's happened to all you members out there who seem to have lost your voices and not be able to express yourselves suddenly, but I do think we all need to say if we can't hear people. So please, can I just encourage all members of council to say if they can't hear people properly. It's usually a matter of just bringing the microphone a little bit closer, or it could just be speaking up. But whichever, I think it is really important. We are struggling to work in a slightly different way. We have to get to know new technology and different ways of working as we work our way through this pandemic. So I just really wanted to express sympathy with the Chair of Scrutiny, who was not told until after the meeting that people had been struggling to hear, and to just encourage members to speak up. I think it is really important that we can hear each other, but it's also really important that we say if we can't.
Thank you. Okay. So we're going to vote tonight. Okay. We're going to vote tonight. So just raise your hands for those in favour, please. Although I did prefer the other method.
Lord Mayor, I can't see any hands not up, so that's carried.
That's carried. Okay. I was just saying, but I did enjoy it when I saw all the councillors moving when we were voting. Maybe we should bring that back later. Okay. Item 18. This brings us on to motions of notice. Sorry. Yeah, it's me moving the mic. Okay, motions on notice, briefing notes. So the first one is the Dss Discrimination, and the proposer, Councillor Thomas, and seconder is Councillor Jarvis. This is a cross-party motion. I want to keep this to time. We have ideally 15 minutes. So I'll call Councillor Wade and then Councillor Malik, who suggested they want to speak on this, but this is a cross-party motion, so I'm hoping we can get this all agreed in 15 minutes. So off you go.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Dss discrimination refers to the practice of refusing to let properties to tenants in receipt of housing benefit or universal credit. No DSS policies have been ruled unlawful under the Equality Act, but the research and campaigns of charities such as Shelter and grassroots groups such as Oxford Tenants Union and Acorn Community Union have shown that the practice is still deeply entrenched. No one can describe better these barriers to accessing housing better than someone who has lived through them, so I want to take this opportunity to share Eddie's testimony. She writes, "For me, the issue of DSS discrimination is personal. 2 days before I was meant to move into my new home with my 2 kids, my letting agent got in touch to say that the landlord had last minute refused my tenancy application, apparently because of supposed inconsistencies in my universal credit child benefit payment. There were no such inconsistencies. This was a cover for straight up no DSS discrimination. Luckily for me, I found another house and am now settling in with my family. Others aren't so lucky. They end up couch surfing, relying on relatives, or even homeless. I thought I might end up homeless, and it was terrifying. This is why I'm very happy to see this cross-party DSS discrimination motion come before Council. If passed, it will be a big step forward in the fight against no DSS. It's a fight we need to win. Lord Mayor, I want to take this opportunity to thank Eddie for agreeing to share her testimony, because it is voices like hers that we need to hear in Town Hall. The motion I am proposing calls on the Housing and Homelessness Panel to consider this issue and make relevant recommendations, calls on Cabinet to take action to revise the Landlord Accreditation Scheme to denounce illegal discriminatory practices. It calls for a dedicated page on the council website to provide information on recognising and tackling DSS discrimination, and it asks that duty housing officers be informed about the issue and encouraged to refer cases to the Welfare Reform Team and independent advice centres. It asks that Cabinet establish a permanent tenants forum composed of community groups and stakeholders representing tenants, who will work closely with the Housing and Homelessness Panel. I'm grateful to the officers for advising on the legality of the motion and to party leaders and Councillor Wade for their time reaching a cross-party agreement. Tonight, we can send a strong message that Council is united across party divides in supporting low-income families in the private rented sector. Thank you.
And we have a seconder in Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I wanted to start by firstly thanking Councillor Thomas for the work that's been put into bringing this vital motion to Council today, and I also wanted to thank the group leaders for supporting the bringing of this as a cross-party motion, and I hope that indicates a collaborative and cooperative approach on the Council going forward. I finally think it's really important to thank ACORN, the community union, for the fantastic work that they have done campaigning to end DSS discrimination in this city. Housing is a human right, and that should never be in dispute. It's a basic measure of a decent society that people should not face destitution or discrimination in pursuit of having a roof over their head and a place to call home. But for too long, some landlords and letting agents have been putting up barriers to that becoming a reality. They've been acting with impunity, and they've been engaging in explicit discrimination against benefit recipients, discrimination that hits the most vulnerable in our society the hardest. And despite DSS discrimination having been ruled unlawful in 2020, we know that it is still going on in Oxford, we know that covert discrimination is still happening, and we know that it's pushing tenants into even more precarity. Discrimination against people on housing benefit and universal credit is one of the many, many issues in the private rented sector that needs tackling. As a renter in the city, I've experienced firsthand the eye-watering rents, the rigged and squeezed market that puts power in the hands of those with property and takes it from those without. For those of you who are not renters, I'm sure that all members will have heard countless horror stories from residents in their wards who do live in the private rented sector. And while the issues in the private sector are many and varied, DSS discrimination is amongst the most egregious. It's an abhorrent practice, it's a discriminatory, reactionary barrier to housing that must be torn down. It will be rightly looked back on in years to come with revulsion, and this motion is an important step towards consigning this unjust, immoral and unlawful practice to history in our city. I urge all members to vote for this motion and help stamp out DSS discrimination in Oxford.
Okay, Councillor Malik.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm very happy to support the motion, and thanks, Councillor Thomas, to bringing this motion to the Council. I think Oxford is proud of their diversity and being a city where we welcome everything, and this is one of those practices, I think, like just Councillor Jarvis said, is a human right, and every should have the opportunity to the housing. And the just scenario, just what read out by Councillor Thomas about the story. So it's not a one story, it could be many stories if you go and search. So I think it's a very important motion. I'll keep it short, and I'll happy to support that.
Thank you. Councillor Liz Wade.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is a very important motion, which is why we're pleased for it to be cross-party. Our view is that cross-party motions should be taken not as part of the 60 minutes, and we argued this in the Constitution Review, but we're outnumbered. So as a result, it is going to be part of the 60 minutes for all our motions, and it means, I hope, that we will get through it quickly. So I will be brief. It is a huge challenge to get landlords to accept tenants on housing benefit or universal credit. Our officers work incredibly hard at it, but it's difficult, and this motion, which our party wholeheartedly supports, offers sticks but no carrots to landlords. More needs to be done, especially where tenants have other issues apart from being on benefits. In Bristol and Glasgow, there are two very successful social enterprise agencies which provide long-term support to both landlords and tenants. As a result, many more tenants on benefits are being successfully found PRS homes, and they're able to remain in them. because their support continues for as long as it's needed. There has been talk about this in Oxford, but talk needs to go further, either through engaging with a charity which will set up the agency or by doing it ourselves from within the council. So I hope that the council will take this on board. Thank you.
Councillor Wolfe, is there anything you want to add to this? Okay. Councillor Turner, briefly.
Yep. Lord Mayor, the debate's focused rightly on the topic in the title, but I did just want to speak in support of the final bit around rates of housing benefit and also the cap, the household benefit cap. I did a cursory check comparing the local housing allowance rates to adverts on Rightmove. There's one property which is affordable on an HA for 1 bedroom. There are no affordable 2 or 3 bedrooms. There are 4 affordable 4 bedrooms. It is outrageous that government is expecting people to, if they're on a low income, to move out of Oxford, saying places like Oxford are not for them, and this is a calculated policy to do that, to move people out. And really quite outrageous, uprooting people from their families and their roots. In addition to that, we're all well aware of the rates of child poverty in Oxford, a policy which says large families will be discriminated against, is an outrage in this day and age, and I'm very glad we're adding our voice to those who are against it, Lord Mayor.
Okay, no more questions. Just Councillor Hollingsworth.
Sorry, glass is steaming up, mask off. Right. Very briefly, in support of the motion, but also to pick up a comment made by Councillor Wade. If I understood her correctly, she was suggesting that the City Council doesn't have tenancy support work with private sector tenants. That's incorrect. I may have misunderstood what she was saying, but the Council does have teams, part of the welfare reform team, working to sustain private sector tenancies, which I think she was referring to.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Thomas, did you just want to sum up before we move to the vote, please?
I'd just like to quickly add that this motion comes at an important time. The eviction ban has ended, and I've heard from officers who are already noticing an increase in people approaching them that are at risk of homelessness. More people are relying on benefits as livelihoods have been hit hard by the pandemic. The councillors in this room are sensitive of the difficulties faced by those hardest hit by the pandemic, and I urge them to take this public opportunity to demonstrate just that. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to move to the vote, and those in favour, please stand up.
Lord Mayor, that is everybody. So that's carried.
Thank you, well done. Okay. B, short-term lets. We have Councillor Lizzie Diggins and Councillor Hunt to second. So, Councillor Diggins, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So it is estimated that now about half of the city's residents live in private rented accommodation. However, talking to residents in my own ward of Carfax and Jericho, it is clear that an ever-increasing number of properties, which were homes for families and local residents, are being lost and turned into short-term lets. While this shift is hard to quantify, citywide it is estimated that 900 properties are rented for most of the year as entirely short-term lets. This loss of homes puts an upward pressure on rents, which are already amongst the most expensive nationwide. I know too from speaking to residents living close to short lets, especially the so-called party houses, that it can be unbearable. This is not the case for the entire sector, and this is not about family homes letting a spare room, or even those only let for a small part of the year. Indeed, as we recover from the pandemic, I'm sure that short-term lets will play an important role in welcoming visitors back to our city. However, the sector is currently unregulated. This means they are not on a level playing field with our hotels and guest houses, which are subject to specific planning laws and environmental health, food and fire safety regimes. Not only do these regulations help ensure that customers in our hotels and guest houses are safe, it also means that short-term lets are held to a different, lower standard. They do not even have to pay for commercial collection services, meaning they can use domestic bin services even though they pay little or no council tax. We can currently only enforce short lets in breach of planning permission or with reports of sort of persistent antisocial behaviour. But in practice, this is near impossible to do. And the government introducing a separate planning class and allowing us to apply licensing schemes like those we have for our private rented sector would give local authorities the power, when appropriate for their area, to determine the number, location and standard of short lets and ensure unlicensed landlords cannot use short lets to undercut our rental and tourism sectors. This motion welcomes the Leader of the Council's recent letter on the subject, and we are joining her call to campaign for the government to legislate so we can ensure that the short-term let sector is regulated, safe and works for our city. Thank you.
Thank you. And seconder, Councillor Hunt.
I have nothing to add to that. I think Lizzie summed it up, and I second that.
I don't know what happened there. Councillor Hunt, can I just ask you to repeat that and please bring the microphone closer to you?
I second that. I have nothing to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. And do we have any more questions from the floor? Comments, sorry. Councillor Hollingsworth.
So it's going to sound like a Carfax and Jericho thing, but it's coincident. I think one of the issues which is sometimes overlooked in the debate about short-term lets and the impact they have is that around safeguarding. Now, many of us were councillors when the Bullfinch report was published, but many of us who were not councillors when that report was published were well aware of what its contents were. And anyone who's lived in this city for any length of time will know the shameful role that guest houses played in that awful story. And that's why this council and all the councils across Oxfordshire adopted really robust proposals for regulation of the guest house sector, which the guest house sector took on board and delivered because they recognised the problems that had occurred. One of the concerns I have about the unregulated short-term let sector is that it is completely outside that voluntary regulatory framework, and none of the safeguards of going through reputable letting agencies exist. So, for example, I spoke to a letting agency which does relatively short rental periods, mostly for visiting businesses and such like, wanting 3 months for a particular property in Summertown. And they said that they'd become very adept at spotting when there's a problem. When two older men come into the office and leave a car with two women in the back seat, particularly a car which has no doors on the rear side, and can and will and have done call the police about those issues. None of those basic safeguards are there when you're talking about short-term lets. Now, in Carfax and Jericho, literally 2 minutes walk from my house a few years ago, a short-term let was being used as a brothel. That came to light when terrified women climbed over the fence into the next door garden because a group of armed men, presumably in dispute over who had control over that particular trade, had burst into the house. Now, that sort of thing is fortunately very rare, but it's the sort of thing which can happen in an unregulated rental sector like the short-term rent sector. And what we've been asking for from this council, as other councils have, is simply the opportunity to regulate. We're not demanding national regulation. Each council needs to set its own policies. But in a place like Oxford, with lots of tourists, a massively overheated private rented sector, a huge shortage of homes, we would want to, I think, introduce basic policies, and I think that issue around child exploitation and human trafficking is one that's really relevant.
Thank you. Councillor Clarkson and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I would like to support this motion. Marston, in fact, was the first ward, in fact, where a retrospective application for a short-term let was rejected on the basis that really it was a serviced apartment. And the kind of problems that the neighbours faced in this street of terraced houses was people arriving late at night, not knowing where the keys were, so knocking on the neighbours' doors to find out. Not knowing that it was a residence parking zone, so parking their hire car inconveniently. Daily deliveries of clean laundry and extra traffic. Noisy parties, but by the time that the neighbours were able to complain, the people had moved on. Yes, you get these problems, of course, with longer-term tenants, but in fact most longer-term tenants do learn to live with their neighbours, but this was happening several times a week, and it was becoming unbearable for people with small children. So I think Alex is absolutely right. We do need to have more regulation, and I would urge people to support this motion.
Susan?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I certainly concur with the previous speeches, but I particularly wanted to just touch on the issue of loss of housing. And I just think for a city with such housing need as ours, that is also a really important issue to be raising, and it's one of the reasons why I make no apology for continuing to raise it with ministers at every opportunity, and also to try and make common currency on this issue with other areas which have similar issues to us on this, which are often areas of high tourism, often perhaps areas that we might not think we have so much in common with. Seaside towns are in particular experiencing a lot of the same issues that we are in terms of an increase in unregulated short-term lets and expensive housing, and therefore a shortage of the available housing because of this particular issue. Maybe that will be an advantage for us in making our case to government, because some of these towns are conservative-led, so we might have a listening ear in government where they don't listen to councils such as ours quite so frequently. But I think it is a very serious issue. We've seen over time a very severe loss of housing to various different means. And as we've just been discussing, you know, the price of private rented housing keeps going up, and it will continue to go up, particularly if family housing is lost to short-term lets. And it doesn't make for good neighbourhoods. I think it's really important in terms of our placemaking. If we have lots of empty houses or houses that are, you know, only occupied by people with no real interest at all in their neighbourhood because they're only there for 2 nights, then it is not good for our city and for our neighbourhoods and our communities. So for all of these reasons, in areas such as ours, where there is a very high propensity to take houses out of the ordinary housing market, put them into short-term lets, and lose those houses from being available to local people, I do think we have a strong case to make to government to be able to regulate that locally in the same way that we are increasingly regulating the private rented sector and also houses in multiple occupation, when those too became problematic in our city. So I hope that everyone will support the motion. I think there's lots of very good reasons to do so, and we will continue to make the case loud and clear to government for the need for regulation.
Thank you, Susan. Any other comments?
I suppose I don't want to be perverse, but I mean, Airbnb does have benefits as well as negatives, and it does need to be seen as a balanced in balance with the benefits as well as the negative aspects of it.
Councillor Malik.
Yeah, very brief. It may have a benefit, but in my ward, in Temple Cowley, where a couple of Airbnb people are fed up because the time they come and go, the rubbish they left, and the landlord whenever they come and go. So I think what I really support and interested, not just on the principle, also when it says they should be charged commercial rate to pick up their waste collection, because at the end of the day they're running a business, so they should be paying business rates. Yeah, so I'll support the motion.
Thank you, and I thank the speakers as well. Yeah, just to be clear, we're talking about sort of the entire short-term let sector rather than anything specific. And we're also, as I think Councillor Brown said, we're not asking the government to sort of make any big national declaration about what every local authority needs to do. We're simply asking the government to give local authorities the power to take action in areas like ours where it's appropriate. And we're asking for this to stop the loss of housing, which is leading to increasing rents, for better neighbourhoods, to support our tourism sector, to sort of reduce the negative impacts on our local residents, and, as Councillor Hollingsworth highlighted, for the important issue of safeguarding and stopping things like human trafficking, which, as we have heard earlier, are a complete blight on our society. And so, yeah, I urge you to vote for this motion for all of the above reasons. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to vote. So all those in favour, please stand.
Lord Mayor, I see everyone standing, so if people could sit down, I'll just check. Can I just check that, is anyone voting against? I see none, and any abstentions? I see none, so that's carried.
Thank you. Okay, so the motion Trees for Life has now been withdrawn. But I'm just going to double check with Councillor Landell-Mills that is correct.
Yes, Lord Mayor, that's correct.
Thank you. My apologies to everybody. Just before we move on to the East Oxford low traffic neighbourhood, I do need to take a 5-minute break. So we're going to have. So if I'm having a 5-minute break, you can all have a 5-minute break.
Thank God for that.
Okay, can we all take our seats, please? Okay, can I have your attention, please? Thank you. Okay, motion D, East Oxford Low Traffic Neighbourhood. We have Councillor Wolfe proposing and Councillor Miles to second. The floor is yours, Councillor Wolfe.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. What was that? Oh, that was my voice echoing, I think. Thank you. You have the text of the motion in front of you. Can I just make a brief comment that all the various things there in the opening sections, the bullet points, where in the motion as submitted contained all the necessary citations. I think they haven't been reproduced here. That doesn't really matter, but just to assure you that all those statements are backable up. The second thing to just remind members is that this is about a trial. It's about the trial of a low traffic neighbourhood, which is the key thing. It's not about the permanent thing, it's about a trial. So, the East Oxford LTN is key to the whole LTN programme because it includes Magdalen Road, Howard Street and Divinity Road, which many residents think of as a sort of inner ring road because it goes in a straighter line. Actually, if you ask Google Maps for directions, it hardly ever shows it as the quickest route across town. The whole programme, LTN programme, should have been trialled in East Oxford first. In December 2019, that's a year and a half ago, we had a professionally designed LTN scheme for St Mary's and the so-called Robin Hood area between Magdalen Road and Howard Street. It was ready for public consultation a year and a half ago. Florence Park also had a scheme designed. By July 2020, when the government announced funding for such schemes, we in St Mary's already had several public meetings under our belt and had made significant amendments to our scheme as a result. Florence Park had also done some public engagement. For some inexplicable reason, however, when the county bid for funding went in, this key scheme in East Oxford was left out. And schemes in Church Cowley and Temple Cowley, which, so far as I know, were not professionally designed and had done no great public consultation, were put in. We all know the consequences. There's another consequence of this peculiar decision to roll out trials further out of Oxford, but not in East Oxford, and that is that, and prefaces by saying that we have been doing, with the help of residents, traffic counts on the streets in the East Oxford area. The consequence of this is that traffic counts have multiplied since last December up to last Friday, which was our most traffic count, by a factor of 4 to 6. So peak traffic flows have gone from roughly 85 vehicles an hour to, at peak, 400. That has been one of the implications of leaving the East Oxford scheme out of the trial.
30 seconds.
There's nothing new about LTNs. There are 18 of them around Oxford. To put it bluntly, the previous county administration bungled the programme and put it in danger. We're asking for your support in prodding them to protect our residents and complete the trial instead of leaving a big hole in it and compromising the validity of the whole trial. The county is now a cross-party Labour, Lib Dem, Green coalition. We would hope they would receive this motion as an encouragement to help us out. It's not a county bashing exercise. They have an opportunity now to put the mistakes right.
Thank you very much. Just on time. Okay. Councillor Mills is going to second the motion.
I second the motion put forward by Councillor Wolfe on the East Oxford LTN. I'm a resident of St Mary's Ward as well as a city councillor for Summertown. I've been part of the extensive consultations organised by Councillor Wolfe and his colleagues, as well as the County Council stakeholder consultation process. There is majority resident support for the pilot, and for good reason. Safety is one. Every day when I step out of my house, I fear that the through traffic on my street will cause harm to my children and that of others as it cuts through from the Iffley to Cowley roads. Only a few weeks ago, there was a car on its roof on Her Street in the late afternoon as it used the neighbourhood as a racetrack. Thankfully, no one was killed. The proposed LTN trial intends to improve safety for residents and those transiting the neighbourhood using active travel. Objectors to the proposals are non-residents, some of whom will live in areas with and benefit from existing LTNs. Objectors cite traffic displacement as an issue, with an impact on those who have no choice but to continue to use their vehicles. Congestion is an issue in Oxford, and we recognise that, and including within the area is Divinity Road, and that is really congested during rush hour. I recognise this and the valid concerns raised, and which are also raised by supporters. But this is an issue that predates the pandemic, and we need to recognise and address the concerns raised, but we also need to recognise that the LTNs in East Oxford are not the problem, nor the whole solution. They're part of a series of bold actions that need to be taken to solve a complex problem. There's a need for a coordinated and holistic and ambitious approach to traffic management and active travel to address congestion. We need to show leadership and action and live up to all of our election promises, including supporting LTNs, as an evidence-based concept, especially in the face of the climate emergency. Today, it's not a question of if the LTN should happen, it's a question of when. Do and can we align the timing of this pilot with the other wider series of actions necessary to enable people to feel safer, taking alternative active travel and public transportation options? Now, some of this is beyond our control, including the pandemic. A pilot, though, with an ETRO is in our control. It's by its very nature temporary. It's a learning exercise. What would be bold is to use this opportunity to test the proposals now, learning by doing and then refining. Indeed, the officer report states it is not possible to assess the impact without trialling, monitoring data and seeking feedback via consultation once implemented. The question is not if we implement the East Oxford LTNs, it's when. Let's just stop talking about it and implement the pilot now, and then we can make evidence-based decisions on refining the how. The Oxfordshire Fair Deal Alliance presents an unprecedented opportunity for us all to work together collaboratively in an informed way on this shared problem. And for this reason, I support the motion, and for this reason, I also object to the watered-down proposal that Councillor Hayes puts forward. When is as swiftly as possible? How do we define what constitutes a necessary or unnecessary delay? The amendment represents a very different motion to the one put forward by Councillor Wolfe, and I request the monitoring officer to confirm the rules of amendments to motions. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Malik and then Councillor Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think not anyone denies about climate emergency and the traffic and the pollution, but I think what Dick Wolf or anybody who just talking about on this promotion is, I think they're not learning a lesson from the Cowley LTN, the mistake that been made there. I mean, Councillor, I think Mills just said, oh, there was a car there, luckily nobody was killed. It's a scaremongering. You got a good and bad driver everywhere. Like equally, you got a good and bad cyclist everywhere. As a taxi driver, I see them going through red light. That doesn't mean every cyclist is a bad one, but it happens. So you have people across. Councillor Wolf talked about Moglen Road and Divinity Road. Well, if I go back when Green Party was influenced the manufacturing of the Cowley Road, they destroyed it, bringing all those narrow road and wider pavement, which now we can unbolt the issue, because if they wouldn't done that scheme, then we would have more room to maneuver everyone over there. So that was about 18 years ago, and I tell you, East Oxford Action Group done a survey that time. There was more than 10,000 cars a day was going. So that's going about 18, 19 years ago. So you can see how many number of car goes on Cowley Road nowadays. So if there is a survey, I'm happy to hear from Councillor Wolf. Divinity Road is a main road to majority of the hospitals. You go up to Wanford Hospital, Churchill Hospital, to the other side. 2009 and 13, I was a county councillor for East Oxford. And that time, my memory served me right, Darara was very happy to have a one-way road before this LTN stuff come. Going up Divinity Road, having a no entry coming down, coming down Southfield Road, and having like Moglen Road and the Howard Street style speed breaker so people can't speed. But because the LTN came now, so everybody wants to shut those roads. So imagine the impact. And when you talk about the consultation, unless you've been speaking just to your neighbors, the question will be, for example, St. Mary wards. Have you had a meeting with the Stanley Road Mosque, the church on the Moglan Road, the Buddha Center, and the other businesses? Also, not just on Moglan Road businesses, also the business this side of Kavli Road, because you share a ward with Councillor Hayes and Councillor Hunt the other side. So all those businesses need to be engaged and spoken to and see the impact. And also, you have seen today in the Kavli, whatever they're saying, impact, SCN is raising their concern. So already St. Friedwald School or St. Gregory, whichever you want to call it, they have said the planter you are proposing in Howard Street, that will be catastrophic for them to get A to B. Already the school in Kavli area, there are complaints from the head teacher, the children are coming late. So, am I done? Or?
You're done, thank you.
Right.
Okay. Tom, to propose your amendment, please.
Can I propose the amendment? I want to speak on the substantive motion, though, not the amendment.
So I think he said he was formally proposing.
I'm formally
he just did it
proposing
so
it.
quickly I wasn't paying attention.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
Am I okay to speak on the substantive motion?
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to try to speak twice. The first on the substantive motion, the second on the amendment that I'm proposing, and Councillor Hollingsworth is seconding. On the first part of what I'm going to say, I want to tell a story in numbers. So why do we need to have traffic management? I think this is a part of the discussion which is
Sorry,
currently...
Tom, to interject, just taking some advice, you need to propose your amendment first.
Can I propose my amendment, please?
Yeah, and then you can talk about the both. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. What I was saying is that I want to tell a story in numbers, which is about why we need to address traffic in our city. And there are two themes. The first is the social justice reason. The second is the climate action reason. The social justice reason. In Oxford, car ownership depends heavily on household income. In Oxford, 65% of the population in social grade DE, which is your semi-skilled, your unskilled, your manual labour, will own a car. This number will rise to 81% if you are in the social grade AB, which is your professional and your managerial professions. Now, this is the average across the city. It's 2011 census data. There will be variations within wards and across some wards, but that is the picture across the city. Looking at similarly sized and situated cities to Oxford, you would imagine that that trend is going to become even more pronounced when you see the 2021 census data produced. So who owns and tends to drive cars? It's tending in Oxford to be your better off people who earn more money. Who tends to ride on buses? It will be people who can't afford cars, who can't afford to drive cars. It will be people who are in lower income jobs. And currently, before the pandemic, those people were seeing a 38% reduction in the speed of their buses because there were so many cars in front of them. They were seeing a third more buses having to be put on our roads just to meet timetable because so many drivers were stuck in traffic which was caused by private car use. So if we really do want to advance social justice in the city, we need to back the bus and we need to back people who will overwhelmingly ride the bus. And the way to do that is about trying to reduce the number of non-essential trips which will be taken by private car and in front of buses. And that's particularly the case because we're going to see an increase in private car use up to 2031. You're going to see 24% more departures from the city. You're going to see 19% more arrivals by car by 2031. You'll see a 40% increase in the average morning peak vehicle delay by 2031 compared to how it was in 2013. Life is going to become very much harder on our roads because of the rise in traffic. It will disproportionately affect the poorer parts of our city and poorer people in our city. That then takes me to the climate reason. Just last week, we produced a substantive report from the Zero Carbon Oxford Partnership, which in great detail said what we needed to do as a city to become net zero by 2040 or earlier. You'll all have seen the flooding that's happened across Europe. We saw some of that in London yesterday. We need to act. By 2025, we need a 34% reduction in transport emissions. we need a 44% overall reduction of emissions. By 2030, we need a 70% reduction in transport emissions. Overall, we need a 62% reduction in emissions. By 2035, we need an 84% reduction in transport emissions. By 2040, you need an 88% reduction in transport emissions. That means a 30% reduction in road transport. The planet is burning. If we care about our children and our grandchildren, and we want to pass on the planet and our city in better state than where we inherited it, we need to take action to manage our transport.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder? Councillor Hollingsworth.
I mean, after that, I hope no one's ever going to criticise me again for liking numbers. Councillor Wolfe, in moving the original motion, was quite right about many things, but he was particularly right when he referred to the previous administration at the County Council's inexplicable decision-making. 132 years it took to remove Tory influence from Oxfordshire County Council, which is at least 131 and a half too long in my view, but there we are. And I think inexplicable is about right, except possibly when it came to the removal of the LTN that we had in Walton Street, where a consultation showed massive support in keeping it as it was, and where immediately after the election, 90% of the vote went to candidates who were in favour of keeping it. And yet in the very last decision, after 132 years of Tory rule, the very last Tory decision was to reopen Walton Street in complete defiance of public opinion and that consultation. But the reason I'm supporting the amendment, and apologies for the history lesson, is that when we approach things strategically, they work. In the 1970s, early 70s, Oxford introduced a balanced transport strategy which led to the park and rides and stopped car numbers rising for 20 years. In the 1990s, we had the Oxford Transport Strategy, which again reduced car levels in the city centre and stopped them rising for a while in the outer part of the city. And before 2020, we had Connecting Oxford, a strategic approach supported by this council and the county council to do the same again. When we've done things strategically, they've worked. When we've done them in isolation, they haven't. Longer in the tooth even than me will remember Divinity Road being closed in the late 1980s and then having to be reopened again. What concerns me is the last 12 months have seen the kind of breakdown of that strategic approach and replacement with essentially tactics. And the LTNs are tactics. Now, Dick is right. If they'd been implemented as planned, they could have been a strategy, but they weren't. And Tom is fundamentally right that we must have a strategic approach to shift away from car-based journeys towards public transport, towards cycling, and towards walking. What we need is a strategic, comprehensive and integrated approach, and that's all that the amendment is calling for. I'm as fully supportive of LTNs when they're used in a strategic context as the movers of the original motion are. What I want to do is to see them succeed. What I don't want to see is to see what happened to Walton Street in the last act of a Tory administration on County Council, or what happened in Divinity Road in the late 1980s. We cannot afford to fail on this. And that's my worry, and that's why I support the amendment to the motion.
Councillor Smoten. Yes, Councillor Smoten, it's all yours.
Thank you. I will support this motion. I think the opportunity to open up new quiet cycle routes and the nudge away from car driving provided both make LTNs a promising instrument for change. However, I'd like to advance a specific reservation that I think we ought to keep top of mind. We've recently seen the results from the first wave of consultation on the East Oxford LTNs, and particularly that a majority of respondents outside the proposed trial areas expressed opposition in that consultation. Because those participants are self-selecting, that doesn't give us a conclusive picture of the broader will of the people, but it is a concerning sign, and it's one that's backed up by my own experience door knocking on the topic in the recent past. One of the most common complaints that I hear from people who oppose the LTNs is that our councils are remote or uncaring, or that they are indifferent to people's wants and needs outside of election times, essentially an expression of lack of faith in our democratic intent. If we are seen to force people to accept an unpopular scheme without their consent, we will deepen that discontent and that lack of faith. Therefore, I wholeheartedly welcome the county's commitment to thorough pre-implementation engagement, which has resolved many design problems that could have made the East Oxford LTNs perhaps look foolish on the ground, but which have now been headed off at the pass. I hope that we are able to press ahead with what seems to me like a promising experiment, but I hope that we get there by winning people's trust and consent to be the subjects of that experiment, rather than by pressing ahead to implementation and simply hoping that they learn to like it in time. Thank you.
Councillor Linda Smith.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to speak in favour of the amendment. LTNs can be a useful tool in the box available to us to improve local neighbourhoods, but only if they are done right. And the LTNs currently being trialled in Oxford have not been done completely right. They were rushed in without proper community consultation, without proper traffic modelling, and without thorough assessment of their impact on surrounding areas. The result in Temple Cowley has been displaced traffic causing congestion and poor air quality in nearby areas such as on Holloway, which residents of Lye Valley and others who travel through the area, whether they cycle, walk, take the bus or drive, are now having to suffer. Even worse is the impact these rushed schemes have had on community relations. This council has always championed the diversity of East Oxford and worked to bring people and communities closer together. But many local people feel these schemes have so far been imposed from the top down without due thought and consideration for some of our hardest working and most marginalised residents. As a result, neighbour has been pitted against neighbour and community cohesion has been damaged. So I welcome this amendment as I welcome the new approach to these schemes from the new ruling coalition at County Hall. Yes, let's proceed with the LTN trials where they are wanted and where they have the capacity to improve neighbourhoods and create a better environment for cyclists and pedestrians. But local people need to be involved from the outset. Schemes must not be imposed by politicians and lobby groups. We need thorough community consultation, not just online. We need proper monitoring of the trial schemes and their impact on the wider area. Basically, we need the county to take the time and effort needed to get these schemes right, not to rush through a botched scheme which is in danger of failing to deliver the environmental objectives it seeks to, and in danger of causing harm to local businesses and communities. So the trials should proceed swiftly if possible, but most importantly, at the speed required to take local people along and for the schemes to work both for our highways and for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt, please. And I realise Councillor Malik also put his hand up, but you can only speak on the amendment.
Yeah, on the
briefly,
amendment.
But Councillor Hunt first, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll be swift. Just to add my voice as a councillor of Divinity Road, really, and to stress that as a recent resident of East Oxford, it is inexplicable, a nice word used by Councillor Hollingworth, that the road traffic filters were not introduced earlier, or certainly were removed in 1985. I mean, what everyone has told us is that Divinity Road and its outlying streets were a pleasant place to live, where children could cycle and where you weren't woken by the roar of traffic. So I urge everyone to vote in favour and for the LTNs to be implemented as swiftly as possible, in order also that Oxford can keep up with the other cities in this country which have implemented their LTNs, including London, as we know. And as my neighbour said to me today, she has to now go to London to get a good night's sleep.
Sarge, briefly, please.
Very brief. I hope Council can understand. I mean, LTN in principle is a great idea. Practically, you have to look at it. It requires an investment in infrastructure. Currently, cycle lanes are full of potholes and broken drains, which push cyclists into middle of the road. When you talk about buses getting on it, 250 for next bus stop, 4 of you is a £10. So council need to work with the bus companies to have a cheaper bus service. You got 3 corner of the city lying at railway line. Now you can't have the excuse who runs the county. You 3 people are in a coalition with the county council. Bring the investment there. You can have a easily a couple of carriages from Redbridge Park and right into the city centre on a cheap ticket where the people can go in. It's been years and years talk about Kavli line, but it never been functional for the passengers. So this is your opportunity to show the people you mean business and people will come on your board. What it requires is a proper consultation, talking to everyone. If COVID permits, you too can have a public meeting in your ward and let's hear the people. So we should not be afraid engage everyone. It's going to be done on the information, education, and basically investment. If you do that, this can work. It's like in Kavli I'm bringing in, is little tweaking required. Traffic can improve that. But I am very flabbergasted because either the man in charge or my county council refused to meet me. I can explain to him how can we remove the traffic better. So please consider everything. Take a chance. You have the opportunity, as people have been talking about, Sarge. But you need to have everybody on board. Thank you.
Councillor Wolf.
Thank you. Yes, I think we're debating the amendment, are we not, at this moment? Yes, yes, I want to address that, and I have to say that this is proving to be a really interesting discussion, and it's digging out some really important stuff. My problem with the amendment is that Councillor Hayes says that there needs to be proper engagement, and Councillor Smith has said the same thing. There needs to be proper public engagement, member involvement, public involvement, and all that sort of thing. Councillor Hayes himself has actually paid tribute to what we've done in East Oxford and said it's a shining example of how to do it. That's part one of the story. Part two of the story, you've said it in public forums and actually on Twitter effectively, but further out, the lesson is that we haven't done it well. It has not been done well, and it has caused a lot of angst and problems and stuff like that. So we've got 2 pictures. An inexplicable decision to roll things out very quickly further out of the city and not done well, and thoroughly consulted, I can address Councillor Malik's concerns in a bit, within East Oxford, where it is wanted, would work. I mean, I can't think what more we could have done to have consulted, and it has widespread public support. So the amendment says you've got to have this consultation, you've got to do things properly before you implement it. But we have. So the logic of that argument is it should be implemented. But we have another story, which is that we've got a problem, which is that further out, it's created a problem. Councillor Hollingsworth, in seconding the amendment, has used the word strategic. And I think I know what he's getting at. It's quite interesting. And what's also good to hear is that there is clearly strong support within the Labour group for the LTN programme. And what Councillor Hollingsworth has told us is that it's a matter of being strategic about it, and he doesn't want it to fail. And there is a sign that further out of Oxford, it may fail. So I think underneath this, there's a big strategic decision which the county cabinet is going to have to make. I'm not sure that what they wouldn't prefer is to scrap the lot, start again, and start with an East Oxford LTN. But they're not really in that position yet. We don't have the power to tell them what to do. All we can do is say, we would like the East Oxford LTN as soon as possible. And if their conclusion is we can't do that at this point because there's a mess further out, well, that's their decision to make. But I think we're going to have to abstain on the amendment because we want to hold to the idea we want the East Oxford LTN now. And that's really our position. Thank you.
Okay, over to Tom to sum up your amendment, please.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I won't use up my time just by diminishing the work of Councillor Wolf or Councillor Simmons around the LTM work, but I don't think I said that. I've certainly borrowed from some of the questions you've used in a Drara survey, but let's leave it at that. On the question of engaging, to Councillor Malik, Councillor Hunt and I have broken our backs in our wards to talk to all of the residents. We've gone out door knocking, Zoom meetings, the lot. So just to reassure you, local Labour ward councillors across the east of the city are doing that. On the question of consultation, I think it's really interesting to hear what the Liberal Democrats have to say, because listening to Councillor Smoughton, which Councillor Liz Wade was nodding furiously along to, you're not recognising what the motion says. What you're saying is move swiftly with the introduction of the LTNs, and you submitted that before you even saw the consultation responses. Now, there are clearly issues which were raised in that consultation which have to be worked through. The County Council officers, in making a recommendation to your Liberal Democrat cabinet member, recognise that of LTNs, and you'll want to make sure the consultation goes as well.